الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما، ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. اللهم افتح علينا بحكمتك وانشر علينا برحمتك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله الكرام. Alhamdulillah. First of all, I want to thank everybody for coming here today. The response was actually quite overwhelming for us, the organizers as well, and to thank the organizers. I had my own reservations about having any fee, especially if it was going to be in a house of devotion, but most of that is to offset the people working, so I just want to beg all of your indulgence for that. A few things before I start. I have very good memories of this city, Birmingham, and the community here. Every time that I've ever come here, I've always felt welcome, and there's always been a wonderful spirit here. Obviously, I think for some people, in my own personal experience, the last few years have been very, very strange years. So before I got into the subject, I wanted to use this opportunity because I don't always get an opportunity to see people directly. And one of the things about our community is those of us who are living in the West, the community, there's a lot of dysfunction in our community. There's a lot of difficulties. There's also a lot of leadership problems, political leadership, spiritual leadership, intellectual leadership, religious leadership. And we have a lot of different groups, and like the Arabs say, كُلٌّ يَدَّعِي وَصْرًا بِلَيْلَ وَلَيْلَ لَا تُقِرُّ لَهُمْ بِذَاكَ. Everyone claims to know Layla, but Layla denies having knowledge of them. So we've gone through a lot, certainly for me, but I want to just say very clearly, there's a lot of misinformation that has been put out by our community, and it's something that goes with the territory. When you're in da'wah, when you're calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, invariably you have to taste something, a little bit of what the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam tasted. You have to. It won't be real, and also it's a bad sign for you if that's not happening. So you have to, and you end up appreciating and having a greater love for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because when you get slandered, when people tell lies about you, it's very small and insignificant, but if you imagine the Prophet ﷺ, when a whole society was lying about him, a whole society was slandering him, everybody was against him. So when you have just certain people that are against you, it becomes insignificant when you see what the Prophet ﷺ himself had to go through. So that's part of the process for Muslims. All of us will share to some degree in that. No matter who we are in our lives, we'll find people turn on you that you would have never thought turned on you. When Waraqa ibn Nawfal said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, I wish I was with you when your people drive you out of the city. He said, will my people drive me out of the city? It was so hard for him to fathom that, because he was al-Amin. He was beloved in the city. People had the highest regard for him. But when he came with something that was critical of the society, when he came with something that was critical of the people, people don't like to be criticized. And often when you criticize people, especially when you do it for their own good. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't criticize people to be critical. He criticized people because he actually wanted them to benefit from that criticism. But the people got upset and turned on the Prophet ﷺ. And over the period of time, though, his sincerity and love for that community was very clear. And eventually they began to see that. And one by one, they recognized that he wasn't trying to harm them. He wasn't trying to undermine their community. He was actually trying to help them, trying to elevate them, trying to do that. And that should be what anybody who has good and love for this community, that should be what motivates them. Now, unfortunately, we have people in our community that thrive on fitna. You know, people, what amazes me about our community is the energy that is expended during fitna. I wish people would expend that energy in other times. But whenever there's a fitna, people get on the phone and start calling and write letters and emails and get very active and they start, getting together and having meetings. They didn't do that to read the Quran, to study the seerah, to do these things. But when it's about fitna, amazing. And that's because Shaitan is there facilitating all those meetings, helping out. Tafaddal. Really, there's that demonic element that is in the world and flowing in our own blood is real. Whatever you want to call it, the Quran calls it shaitan, but whatever you want to call it, however you want to describe it. Some scientists will call it neuropeptides. Doesn't matter. It's real, and it's working in the community. And so one of the things that Muslims need to do is we need to have more antibodies for this type of antibodies are protective things in your body that when there's foreign proteins come in, they kick in and begin to organize in order to protect the body from harm coming from the outside. So it's very important. Now then you also have autoimmune disorders where the body itself begins to attack itself. It's not even a foreign protein. And so one of the problems now, we have autoimmune disorders in our community. We have our own body within the body is turning on itself. So not only do we have foreign proteins that are attacking us, but we also have within our own body, we have our own immune system is harming us. So it's very important for people to be aware of these elements. And I would say that anybody that is trying to undermine the unity of our community in this particular time you have to see them as a shaitan. It's as simple as that. I don't know any other word to call that type of person that is sowing dissension in our community at a time when unity is more important than any other time other than the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself. I mean, we are a fragmented community where our community is under siege in many places, and it's certainly in this country there's a lot of people attacking our community, much of it unjustly, because the community, if you look at the majority of Muslims in the United Kingdom, they're very decent people. They're productive people, and they're good people. Many of the people in Birmingham, they're good, decent people. They're hardworking people, and they're trying to earn a living, and trying to be decent people. And so it's very sinister, those people that try to present them as evil or undermining the society or trying to be subversive when they're not. I mean, those elements in our society are so insignificant statistically. They can harm us because of the impact that they do, but they're actually quite insignificant statistically, and people need to be aware of that. So I would just say anybody that's undermining our community, we should see them for what they are. And Imam Ali radiallahu anhu said that, he said, al-jama'atu ma'a al-kudra khayrun min al-furqa ma'a al-safwa. That the group with its impurities is better than the sect or separation with its purity. Every sect breaks off because they want to be pure. But Sayyidina Ali, what he was articulating there was that the group and the maintenance of the group is so important that you should be willing to put up. خَيْرُ النَّاسِ مَنْ خَالَطَ النَّاسِ وَصَبْرَ عَلَى أَذَاهُمْ. The best of people are those that mix with people and they're patient and forbearing with the problems of the people. So as a community we're going to have our problems, but we should try to be working together. تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. Work together in righteousness and in piety, and don't work together in this foulness and in aggression. So, having said that, I just really want to make it clear that I haven't changed views. I haven't changed my own personal experience. I would hope that I've matured, because that's part of life. You're supposed to learn as you grow. You're supposed to Imam Malik radiallahu anhu began giving fatwa when he was 17 in Medina. By the time he was 90, many of his positions when he was in his earlier period were very different because his knowledge increased, his experience of life changed. The same is true for Imam Shafi. Imam Shafi was when he was in Medina, he was a staunch Maliki. He used to defend Imam Malik's positions. When he went to Iraq and met the Hanafis, he used to debate with the Hanafis. Many debates he had with the great students of Abu Hanifa, and he said, "Man a'lamu, sahibuna or sahibukum? Who's more knowledgeable in the book, your companion or my companion? Who's more knowledgeable in the Sunnah?" He was proud of Imam Malik, his teacher, but then when he began to listen to the Hanafis, he began to change his opinion about what he had learned in Medina, and his views changed, and he was growing, and he eventually became a mujtahid where it was no longer permissible for him to accept the opinions of Imam Malik without thinking, and he left his madhab. And then when he went to Egypt, he also changed, because he was dealing with Egyptians now, not Iraqis. So you have in his school, you have the madhab al-qadim and the madhab al-jadid. His opinions completely changed because he was in different social circumstances. So the nature of your circumstances necessitate different responses. The Prophet ﷺ was very nuanced in his behavior, in his activity. He's the same person, but he's very different in Medina from in Mecca. Orientalists think it's two different personalities. It's not two different personalities. They're two different situations. They changed, so his views changed. In Mecca, he never talked about redressing wrongs. It was all forgiveness. Why? Because he had no political authority. He had no political power. When he became powerful in Medina, it's no longer his prerogative to say, "I forgive you," because now he has to act as the state authority. So he has to redress wrong. If you go to a court, somebody stole your car, and you go to a court, and the judge says, "I'm really sorry he stole your car, but I forgive him." You're going to say, "What are you talking about? It's not your car to forgive him. I want some justice." That's what you want from the state. You don't want them to tell. Now, he can say, "I'm going to fine him, but I would prefer if you forgave him." That's what the Quran says. If you want justice, you can have justice, but it's better that you forgive. That's the Quranic view, and that's the Prophet's personal nature. But when he was in Medina, he was acting as a judge. And that's why, that doesn't mean Mecca's invalidated. That doesn't mean all those verses in Mecca are suddenly, you just throw them out, they're mansukha. Fakhruddin al-Razi said, how can you call those verses mansukha? Those are the highest ethical principles of humanity. To forgive, to overlook. But they're not applicable for the state. They're applicable for individuals amongst themselves. So the verses in Mecca don't abrogate the verses in Medina don't abrogate the verses in Mecca. They nuance them. It's very important. There's only 4 verses in the Quran in which there's actual agreement on their abrogation. is one of the big problems in our community. A lot of Muslims don't understand this. They want everything in the Medinan period, and they don't understand the nature of the Medinan period. Mecca is the secret of Islam is in Mecca. I mean, this is where the religion was rooted. Imam Malik said Islam is a tree, its roots are in Mecca, its trunk is in Medina. And the branches are in Iraq, and the fruits are in Afghanistan. That's what he said. So, unity is at the essence of our community. We're meant to be a unified community. Now, one of the problems with many Muslims is that they don't recognize that there is a major difference between unity and uniformity. We conflate those two. We think that unity means everybody has to be the same. That's not what unity is. If you look at creation, there is an immense unity in the diversity. There's an immense unity in the diversity. Things work together. Ecology is a science that studies how things interact, and that if you change one aspect of a biological niche, you affect the entire niche. So it's very important to know that unity is not uniformity, that Muslims can be unified without having to agree on everything, without having to be the same. We come from different cultures, we come from different backgrounds. All of those are useful things. And that's why in the Quran there are two types of khilaf. There's a khilaf that is madmoom and a khilaf that's mamduh, or praiseworthy. The khilaf that's madmoom is the khilaf about the usul of things, the essentials. The khilaf that is accepted is the khilaf of furu', the branches of things. We're going to differ about branches, but we shouldn't differ about usul. And this is where aqidah becomes so essential, because there is usul in aqidah and there are furu' in aqidah. Much of what Muslims are in debate about and conflict about within our communities in aqidah relate to the furu' of aqidah. They don't relate to the usul. But we've made branch issues, we've turned them into wedge issues that disunite the community, that separate the community. And that's a danger. And that's one of the reasons why the text of Imam Tahawiyyah is such an important text, because what Imam Tahawiyyah did in this text is he really got to the usul of the aqidah. That's what he presents, the usul of the aqidah. And that's why this science traditionally is called usul ad-din. That's what it was called. Al-aslu ma yubna alayhi ghayruhu. The Arabs say that the branch of the root of something, the asl, is what something else is built upon. So you have the root of a tree. The tree is built upon that root. Usul ad-din is the foundation of our religion, because our religion is ultimately first and foremost a belief. And that is why man qala la ilaha illallah dakhala al-jannah. And that's a sahih hadith, and there's a hadith in al-Bukhari that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, anyone that says la ilaha illallah will eventually be removed from hell, even if they spend some time in there for their purification. That the whole basis of the religion is unity. It's an acceptance of the unity of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so, understanding that this deen is first and foremost a belief. It's something that you internalize in yourself. And that's why some of them said that it's a belief that is based upon a firmly rooted assertion in the heart, an articulation on the tongue, and actions that manifest on the limbs. Although the dominant opinion amongst the scholars is it's actually just tasdeeq, that irregardless of what people do with their actions, that ultimately iman is what they believe in their hearts. And that's why you can have somebody who's completely profligate, completely degenerate, and if they still outwardly articulate a belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you have to accept that they have some level of iman and not deny that and say that they're kafir. It doesn't matter who they are. And that's a very important point. But iman has degrees. There's a continuum of iman. And that's why many of the hadiths in which the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يؤمن أحدكم لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى أكون أحب إليه لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لأخيه ما يحب لنفسه. None of you believes. It says لا يؤمن, but what they say in the commentaries, لا يؤمن كمال الإيمان. They don't believe with a complete iman. So part of the completion of iman is that the Prophet is more beloved to you than anyone other than the Prophet ﷺ, including your parents and all of humanity, your children, everything, your wealth, everything. That's why when Umar radiallahu anhu said to the Prophet ﷺ, I love you more than everything except my ego, my own nafs. And the Prophet said, you haven't believed yet until I'm more beloved to you than even your nafs that's between your two sides. And Umar, realizing that, he said, he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, you're even more, I love you even more than my own self. And he said, Al-ana, now your belief is complete. That's also, you don't love for your brother what you love for yourself. Your iman's not complete until you love for your brother what you love for yourself. Imam Nawawi, Shabrakhiti, Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali, many of our ulama, the great ones, said that is not just your brothers in faith, but it includes human beings, that you want for other people what you want for yourself. You want good for them. The Prophet ﷺ wanted good for everybody, including his worst enemies. He prayed for them. Allahumma ahdi qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun. Oh Allah, guide these people because they don't know. He could have said Allahumma al'anhum, but he didn't. He could have said curse them. And they would have been deserving of it for what they did to him, but he didn't. That wasn't his reality. His reality was that he wanted good for human beings, everybody. It didn't matter who they were. He wanted good. He wanted to make his enemies his friends. That was our Prophet ﷺ. So that is completion of Iman. Now, I think Sidi Yahya, I hope, talked about the introduction here to this was a quote from Imam al-Ghazali, and the reason for that quote in this book in particular was because Imam al-Ghazali was pointing out something very important. Aqidah is not Iman. The doctrine of our religion is not what faith is. Anybody can learn doctrine. An Orientalist can learn doctrine. An atheist can learn doctrine. An atheist can master the points of creed. They can memorize a creed. They can recite it to you by rote. They can know its meanings. That is not what faith is. But doctrine is important. One of the Persian poets said that the theologian is like the chaperone. When a male and a female come together in Islamic tradition, you have a chaperone. So they can get to know each other, but you don't want anything illegitimate to happen. So the theologian is like a chaperone in your relationship with God. What the theologian is there to do is to prevent anything illegitimate from happening. Some deviant idea or thought about God. Some misunderstanding about God. I mean, this is very important. So that's the theologian's role, is to articulate the creed or what Muslims believe in order to protect a Muslim in his understanding of God. Now, the highest in Catholic theology, they talk about the via negativa and the via positiva, the two ways of knowing God, the positive way and the negative way. Muslims tended to focus on the negative way, is that the way that you know Allah is to know what Allah is not. Because it's very difficult to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why there's negating attributes. The attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala negate things. So when we say Allah is infinite, what you really understand from that is He's not finite. Because you as a finite creature cannot understand what infinite means, but you know what finite means, things that end. So the idea of an endless reality, that Allah is endless, that Allah had no beginning and no end, you can't understand that. Rasulullah said, "La tafakkaru fi dhatillah." Do not think about, or la tafakkaru fillah in as-sah. La tafakkaru fillah, walakin tafakkaru fi ala'illah. Don't think about God, but think about the blessings of God. Because the word in Arabic for God, ilah, comes from probably from wallaha. There's a debate about it, but probably from waliha, which means to be bewildered. Somebody, when you think about God, it's a bewildering idea. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is so vast and so great that when the human being begins to contemplate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're bewildered, which is why our essential act of ibadah is to put our head on the ground. It's a recognition of submitting the intellect, putting the frontal lobes right on the ground. Amantu billah. The Prophet ﷺ said in an amazing hadith, which Sahih Muslim relates and others relate, that people will continue to ask questions, yatasa'aluna, which can also mean they continue to philosophize. They will continue to ask questions, who created this? And people will say, Allah. Who created that? And people will say, Allah. Who created that? And people will say, Allah. Until somebody will say, who created Allah? Now that's what Richard Dawkins says. That's what that's his book, The God Delusion. The central question in there is, who created Allah? Who created God? And his conclusion is that you can't answer that question, therefore I don't believe in God. So the point of that is that the Prophet said people will ask that question. What was his guidance then at that point? He said, if you hear them say that, قُلْ آمَنْتُ بِاللَّهِ, say I believe in Allah. Say I believe in Allah. Because your intellect cannot arrive at the reality of Allah. And that the more you try to do that, the more bewildered you'll become. And so, at essence, Muslims are people that submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's very, very important and essential to understand. So the Aqidah is called Usul ad-Din. It's the basis of our religion, because our religion is based upon a belief. And that belief is unity. The Prophet ﷺ, the great truth that he brought is La ilaha illallah. That is the great truth. Because he is the messenger of that, he's honored in that truth with Muhammad Rasulullah. Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I bear witness that there is no God but Allah. If you look at the essence of that, la ilaha illallah. Nafi wa ithbat. Negation, the negative way, and then the ithbat, the positive way. So you negate anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as having any substantial reality. It doesn't have reality. It has no substantial reality. It has what's called contingent reality. In other words, it's mumkin al-wujud, it's not wajib al-wujud. It's not necessarily existent. Anything that is possible, conceivable, is contingent. The necessarily existent is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is alone and unique in that. Everything else is contingent. Now, you can see contingency in the world. You can see contingency in your own being. For instance, we cannot exist without space. I have to be in a place. I can't exist without space. I can't exist without, as far as I can tell now, I can't exist without blood. I can't exist without oxygen. You cut my oxygen off, I die. So I'm dependent upon many, many things. But ultimately what Islam, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us is, you're dependent on Allah. These are all asbab. They're just means. But in reality, the qayyum, Allah is al-hayy, al-qayyum. The qayyum of everything in existence is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The only thing that's sustaining existence is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the essential truth of Islam. And this is why we have a definition of God. And our definition of God is al-mustaghni an al-kull wal-kullu muftaqirun ilayhi. God is that which is completely independent of everything, of all things, and everything is dependent on that, on God. That's the definition of ilah. Al-mustaghni an al-kull wal-kullu muftaqirun ilayhi. Everything is dependent upon God. But God is independent of everything. Qul huwa Allahu ahad. Say Allah is unique. Allahu samad. Samad is the one that has no need. Independent. no need of anything. It's the one يهرب إليه عند الحوائج ولا يهرب إلى أحد. That Samad is the one that people go to in need, but it has no need to go to anyone. And this is what a Sayyid is also. Because لله المثل الأعلى. In the world, there are analogies for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are analogies. That is how you know Allah, through the world. تفكروا في آلاء الله. Think about the blessings of God. One of the greatest blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sultan, is the political authority. Why? Because without political authority, there's no redressing of wrong. There's no social organization. There's no safety and security in a society. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made as an analogy the sultan. And that's why in the hadith that the authority is the shade of God. And that is why when you have oppressive authority, what you're being challenged to think about is what are you doing to deserve that? When you have the blessing of good government, it's often because the people are good. To the extent with which they're good, their government will be good. As they begin to deviate and move away from that, the government begins to reflect that. That's what we're told. كَيْفَ مَا تَكُونُوا يُوَلَّ عَلَيْكُمْ. In the Quran, I mean that's in the hadith, that as you are, so are the people put over you. But the Quran, كَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَا بَعْضَ الظَّالِمِينَ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. And like that, we put some oppressors over others because of what they were earning themselves. So the sultan is a way of understanding. The parents also are a way of understanding. Parents will do things to you that you think are cruel, but in reality they're doing it because they actually know it's good for you. A parent will force you to eat something you don't want to eat. And you can get angry at your parent. Why is he making me eat this? Why is she making me eat this? But they're making you eat it because they know it's good for you. Sometimes a parent will punish you because they're hoping that some good will come out of that. So you can see analogies in the world. And it's very important to understand this. So the Prophet ﷺ told us to think, if we wanted to understand Allah, you understand Allah through Allah's creation. You don't understand Allah directly through Allah, but through His attributes and how they manifest in creation. And these are called tajalliyat, because Allah yatajalla fi khalqihi. He manifests, He reveals Himself through His creation. The Prophet ﷺ once was on with his Sahaba, and a woman was giving suck to her child. And the Prophet ﷺ said, "Do you think that woman would throw her child into the fire?" And they said, "No, Ya Rasulullah, she would never do that." Why? Because she has rahmah. She loves her child. He said, Allah has more mercy for His servant than she has for that child. So he was using an analogy of a mother and her love for the child to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In another hadith, he said that Allah has 100 parts of mercy, rahmah. He said 99 He has retained for Himself, and one part of that 100 parts of mercy He sent down to the earth. And with that one part of mercy, all of the mercy that occurs in the earth, even the foal when it raises its hoof to protect, when the mare raises its hoof to protect the foal, that's from the mercy that Allah sent down. It's only one portion, but He has saved the other 99 for the Day of Judgment. So the Prophet ﷺ was showing us that all of the mercy in the world that you see, every act of mercy, every time somebody gives drink to a thirsty person, every time somebody stops to help somebody on the road, every time somebody gets up to help an older person, every time somebody carries something for somebody that needs help carrying something, every time a mother gets up in the night because the baby's crying and she feels that mercy in her heart and wants to go take care, all of that mercy that's happening on the earth, all of that is one part of 100 parts of mercy. The other 99 Allah has reserved for the Day of Judgment, for His servant. These are analogies that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the Prophet ﷺ is telling us to understand our Lord. These are analogies. So when you look at creed, creed is the foundation of our faith. It's what we believe. But it is not belief. And that's what's really important for people to understand. Ultimately, belief is experience. And that is, in religious tradition, you have an attempt to prove God. And this is, there are many, many arguments. The Muslims generally, the reason that they wanted to have some type of rational basis for the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to get out of a type of circular argument. People will say, why do you believe in God? Because God told me to believe in Him. Where did He believe in Him? Where did He tell you? In the Bible. How do you know the Bible is true? Because God said it's true. Where did He say it's true? In the Bible. That type of circular reasoning drives philosophy majors crazy because they can't talk to religious people. So what the Muslims did is they had two ways of looking at this. The first way was going through a rational, what's called kalam, ilm al-kalam. Kalam developed in Iraq and in the conquered Byzantine land. Many of the early ulama were very opposed to kalam, dialectical talking about God. And Imam Shafi said that أن تلقى ربك بغير شرك خير لك أن تلقاه أن تلقى ربك بكل ذنب ما سوى الشرك خير لك أن تلقاه بشيء من الكلام. Imam Shafi'i said, it's better that you should meet your Lord with every sin except for shirk than that you should meet Him with philosophical theology. So the early Muslims did not like ilm al-kalam. They were very opposed to it. Some of the later scholars said what they were really warning people about is common people shouldn't study that, but the ulama, it's necessary for them to say, I don't want to go into those debates, but what's important to note about these Muslims is that they recognize that there is a problem in taqleed. This is really what they recognize. There is a problem in blind faith. There is a problem in just simply believing something because you're told it's true. So you say, why are you a Muslim? Well, my parents were Muslim, they told me to be a Muslim. Their fear was that's not a very strong foundation for your faith. And so they felt that people should learn proofs. Now there were two approaches to this. One of them was to learn a rational approach. And that's where you get into what's called the Cosmological Argument, which, interestingly enough, the most sophisticated formulation of that was from the Muslims, and it's called the Kalam Cosmological Argument. And it's also, interestingly enough, in Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, he says it's really the only argument that has any serious weight for him. Even though he rejects it, he says it's the only one that really warrants a refutation. The other ones he's not interested in. But that one he recognized had some merit at least. That was generally the one, and that was the idea. I mean, the foundation of this argument is that when you look at everything in the world has a cause. Everything is contingent upon something else. You're here because two parents got together and mated, and you went through a gestation period, and now you're here. There's a reason why you're here. You didn't just pop into existence. And so everything in the world has a cause that precedes it. And so the conclusion of that is that the world itself had a beginning. And if there was a time when there was nothing, what tipped the scale for something to come into the world? I mean, that's the essence of the argument. What tipped the scale? And that, what they call the murajjih, the one that tipped the scale of preponderance, the scale of nothingness. So, if there's nothing, then nothing and something are equal. And so, what tipped the scale of something? That is called, in this argument, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That Allah is the one that tipped the scale. So Allah said, kun fayakun, and this is the essential argument. That was one way. The other way, which I find more interesting and more significant, was to look at i'jaz al-Quran and dalail al-nubuwwah. And that is the way of proving the Quran's miraculous nature and proving the prophetic truths of the Prophet ﷺ, that the Prophet himself did things that were absolutely true. Now, one of the interesting things to me about people now writing against the Prophet, there's all these books where they write against the Prophet, and they quote hadiths now. They'll never quote the hadiths that prove that he's a prophet. They only quote the hadiths that they think portray him in less than good light. So, like the Arabs say, ba'ukum tajurru wa ba'ila tajur. You know, your prepositions work, but mine don't. You know, it's the rules of grammar apply to your language, but you're not allowing them to apply to my language. If you look, we have something called mutawatir in our tradition. A mutawatir report is a report where so many people narrate it, it's impossible for them to have conspired together to make this up. Collectively, they could not have made this up because you can't, lies by their nature, eventually something comes out. People put forward things. So an example of that in our tradition is historical narrative. In 1066, Normans came over to the country and invaded England. Now, if you deny that, you're denying a historical fact. It's so many people witnessed that. There were so many independent reports at the time that for somebody to come later and say, no, it's a big conspiracy. They never invaded. And the French in the English language, it was the English that decided to bring the words over. It wasn't the Normans that brought them. So there's people that might be able to argue that, but anybody with any sense will say it's absurd and I don't accept that. Another one is the Cartographers Conspiracy. How many people have been to Australia? Okay, only 2. So, if I argue that Australia does not exist, it's a complete myth, and it was actually a cartographer that didn't like the fact that there was a large body of water in that area without any landmass, so he decided to put some land in there to make the map look a little more aesthetic. And then the cartographers started putting maps where pretty soon all the maps had a place called Australia, and then everybody started believing in Australia. Now, because you don't want people to lose their faith in all the geography teachers in the world, now we have to hire actors to pretend to speak a certain dialect that sounds like they're from a place called Australia, and then in any group there has to be 2 paid people that will say they've been to Australia, but they've never really been to Australia. It's a complete myth. And maybe they even have an airplane where they take you to a place that just looks like Australia and convince you of that. It's absurd. Nobody would believe that, right? That is the idea of mutawatir. Australia is there by tawatur. I have to believe. I've never been to Australia, but I've called numbers that have area code in Australia, and all my teachers said that Australia exists. It's mutawatir. Everybody knows that Australia exists. So that's what a mutawatir report is. The ahad reports are solitary reports. So for instance, there are solitary reports in history that there is a fountain of youth. Ponce de Leon was a Spanish explorer that went to the New World looking for the fountain of youth. That comes from a Muslim myth about Ain al-Khuld. There's a fountain that they say Ilyas drank from and Khidr drank from. I mean, you find this in Muslim books and it goes back even prior to that to Plato. Plato talked about this fountain of youth. So those are ahad reports. Is there a fountain of youth? Allahu a'lam. I don't know. Maybe there is. It's conceivable that there could be somewhere on the earth that people, if they drink water from this place, they don't die as long as the earth is here. It's conceivable. It's not entirely inconceivable because humans can imagine, we can conceive of a unicorn. Do unicorns exist? I don't think so. But for me to absolutely say that unicorns never existed, don't exist, there could have been a time when unicorns existed. There might even be a place in the rainforest that we've never discovered where unicorns exist. I don't know. But those are solitary reports. Now, solitary reports have a continuum of probability. So you get solitary reports that have very high probability and then solitary reports that have very low probability. Mutawatir hadith, they're only about 500. That's all. Those hadith have the same validity as the Quran. The rest of the hadith literature are known as ahad. If they're sahih hadith, the probability is so high, the ulama say you shouldn't reject it. It's so high. But if you rejected a single one, you're not considered a disbeliever. Because nobody can ascertain with 100% certainty that the Prophet ﷺ said that hadith. So we give it like an A in, if you want to use a grading, it's a Sahih hadith is like an A. If it's in al-Bukhari, it's like an A+. If it's in Sahih Muslim, it's like an A+. So, and then you have the Hasan hadith, which are like a B. It's good. It's not excellent. And then you have like a weak hadith, which is C to D, because it could be very weak. Then it's D. It could be a D minus. It's like, 61. If it's mawdu', it's F. It flunked. It's just rejected. It didn't pass. So those are the ahad hadiths. They go from a D to an A+. And so you don't reject an A+, you don't reject a B, you shouldn't reject a C. You're not going to use it as an example. And that's why the fuqaha don't use weak hadith as legislative hadith, because it shouldn't be used as an example. But you don't throw it away, because it passed the test. So you don't just say, oh no, the Prophet didn't say that. No, he probably said it. But we can't say with enough certainty to say that he definitely said it, which is what a sahih hadith is, that it's beyond reasonable doubt that it's there. So that the nature of the mutawatir hadith in relationship to the Quran, we believe the Quran is mutawatir. The Quran came as a mutawatir book. Enough people heard the Prophet ﷺ say it, they memorized it, they transmitted it, and in each generation, so many people have transmitted it. We know there's 7 variants that are mutawatir. So I learned Nafi' an Warsh an Nafi'. That was the qira'ah I learned. When I recite Surah Al-Fatiha, I say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. I say, Maliki Yawmiddin. Maliki, not Maliki, Maliki. Malik and Malik, sovereign and master or possessor, owner. 2 different ways, they're both mutawatir. You can't say, no, that's not Quran. It's mutawatir. You have, most people here learned Hafs, an Asim. Asim is the mutawatir hadith. Hafs is his rawi. So those are all mutawatir, the 7. And then there's 7 more that are considered ahad. And then you have what are called the qira'at shadda, which are the very unusual recitations. قَدْ جَعَلَ رَبُّكِ تَحْتَكِ سَرِيًّا. I mean, that's a qira'at shadda. There's an Arab tribe in the eastern province that says sh. They make a sh sound for the feminine. So instead of saying قَدْ جَعَلَ رَبُّكِ تَحْتَكِ سَرِيًّا, they said قَدْ جَعَلَ رَبُّشِ تَحْتَشِ سَرِيًّا. That's qira'ah shadda. You don't recite that in the prayer, but it's mentioned in the books of qira'at. That was one way of reciting. Some of the Arabs recited that, but because there's no authoritative position that says the Prophet was heard reciting it like that, we don't take it. It's just mentioned in the books, but it's not permissible to recite it like that. Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu recited the Quran with meaning. And that's why his Quran, he had his own mushaf. Sayyidina Ali had his own mushaf that was lost. In his mushaf, he put all of the verses in the order of their revelation. Because Sayyidina Ali said there was not one verse in the Quran that I didn't know when it was recited and when it was revealed and why it was revealed. So his Quran was all the linear revelation of the Quran. Ibn Juzay al-Karbi said, if we only had this Quran, what great knowledge it would afford us about the Quran. But it was lost for a hikmah. But that's how he organized his Quran. Ibn Mas'ud went to Iraq. He was teaching Arabs from the eastern part of Arabia. They speak Arabic differently from Quraysh. So to facilitate that for them, he used to teach them in meaning. So instead of ka'ahn al-manfush, he said kasuf al-manfush. Ahn is dyed wool. The Quraysh used that word. Most Arabs didn't have a word for dyed wool. They just called wool suf. So he said kasuf al-manfush. That's his qira'ah. But it's not a mutawatir qira'ah. And so it's not permissible to recite that. The point that I'm emphasizing here is when something is mutawatir, we consider it undeniable. Now, there are certain things about the Prophet that are undeniable. One of them is the moaning of the palm tree in the masjid. That is a mutawatir hadith. So many people were present, and so many of the Sahaba related that event. And these were upright people. They weren't liars, and they saw this event. Now, you can say, if somebody who's a scientist can say, no, it was just a coincidence that occurred, some noise was there and it occurred, whatever. They can say that. But there were a group of people at that time who saw the Prophet ﷺ move his minbar. They moved the minbar away from the palm tree, and when they came, the Prophet used to give the khutbah under the palm tree. The palm tree started doing ya'innu, it's ta'innu, anina, like that. It was making this moaning sound. Everybody in the masjid heard the moaning sound. The Prophet ﷺ, when he heard it, he went and he took the palm tree and he whispered something in its ear, and the palm tree stopped moaning. Now the palm tree is buried there to this day. There's a place, the Mukhallaqa, if you go, there's an actual place where that palm tree is commemorated by the Ottomans because they maintained the positions where this was. So that hadith is mutawatir. The Sahaba saw that. The Sahaba saw the Prophet ﷺ feed several thousand people. We know that's also a miracle of Jesus alayhi salam. We know that they did wudu and drank when they were in the desert from his hand. He put his hand in a bucket of water, and water came out from his hand. These are miracles that people saw. Now people can say, I don't believe in those miracles. We actually believe many of these miracles are mutawatir. That they didn't tell lies. Now there are things people say about things, but they're just lies, whereas we believe these are mutawatir. But even if you don't accept those, you can say, well, I don't believe those. We have certain things that the Prophet told us. For instance, there is a hadith in Sahih al-Bukhari, and we have collections of Bukhari that go back to the 4th century. So, I mean, they can be tested with ink, and you can see. In Sahih al-Bukhari, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا تقوم الساعة حتى تخرج من أرض الحجاز نار. The end of time will not come until an immense fire emerges in the land of the Hijaz, تضيء أعناق الإبل ببصرة, that will illuminate the necks of camels in Busra. Busra is on the border of Syria and Saudi Arabia today. In 756, 1258 of the Christian era, 6 volcanoes erupted just outside of Medina. The entire city was shook. People woke up at Fajr, they fled to the masjid. These volcanoes erupted, and for days there was massive lava flow. The entire area, and I've been there and seen this with my own eyes, there is a lava formation outside of Medina that goes for 200 kilometers, 70 kilometers wide, 200 kilometers long. This was seen by multitudes of people. Abu Shama Damishqi, who was one of the historians of that time, a recognized historian, was in Medina at the time. He was an eyewitness to this. He said for 30 days, night and day were the same. The intensity of light was so bright. And he said, fortunately, a cool wind came from the west, and the people of Medina did not feel the heat of this fire. The fire was so high, people in Taima, which is 800 kilometers away, eyewitnesses were writing their books at night from the light of this fire. These are eyewitness accounts. Now, when I was in Medina, I saw a man, Professor Rubel from Wales. He's a geologist. We were outside of the Haram. They sent him in by helicopter. He spent 30 years studying the geology of the Arabian Peninsula. He's done for the Arabian Peninsula what was done for Europe in the 19th century. 30 years. This is his life's work. He's an amazing man, and we should honor him, actually. You should give him some kind of award for doing this. This man, when we interviewed him, we had him on film. When he showed us the satellite photos of the lava flowing, it comes right to Medina and it splits. The lava splits. The one section towards the north, it actually goes uphill. towards Mount Uhud. And I asked him, why did the lava go that way? And he said, to be honest, I'm a scientist, he's not Muslim. He said, this defies my knowledge of science. That's what he told me. He said, this defies my knowledge of science. He said, I don't have any scientific explanation. It should have really covered the city. He said, I heard the people were praying, and that's probably the best answer that I could give you. That's what he told us. Now, this is an event that occurred, and I asked him, where would have the light of this fire seen? He said, at least to Syria and to Iraq, probably. He told, in the eyewitness account, the people of Damascus prayed Kusuf, which is the Eclipse Prayer, because the smoke of this fire, they thought it was an eclipse of the sun. In Mecca, they all thought it was the end of time. Mecca it was light in Mecca at nighttime. It was a massive fire. Now, he told us also that geological event is unprecedented in the post-Cambrian world. He said this is like a prehistoric event. That's what he told us. He said the type of lava and the extent of the lava that you see, he said there's nowhere else that. So this was a sign of the end of time that the Prophet ﷺ predicted. Now, when I hear that, I say, Amantu billah, sadaqa Rasulullah. Now, I heard a hadith many years ago, I read it actually, and I learned it, that the Prophet ﷺ said, the end of time won't come until a man's shoe talks to him. Now, when I first read that hadith, I thought it sounded very odd. I mean, personally, I just thought, why would you have a talking shoe? Well, 2 months ago, I was reading the New York Times in a moment of weakness, and sure enough, there's an article, these shoes are made for talking. Nike has produced a shoe that has a digital voice that will tell you how far you walked. So I read that hadith in the 7th century. Now you can imagine the Sahaba hearing the Prophet ﷺ saying, there's going to come a time when people's shoes will talk. And they believed him. Now why did they believe him? Because most people say that's insane. They believed him because they saw so much other stuff from him that they knew if he says that, it's true. Because they knew he was a prophet. So they were willing to accept something completely insane by their standards of understanding. Because it was coming from him. And now, 1,400 years later, you have talking shoes. And all we know is that we're a step closer to the end of time. Because he said the end of time won't come until shoes talk. تُكَلِّمَ الْمَرْأَ نَعْلُهُ. A man's shoe will speak to him. And I read this article. It was in the New York Times. People can buy shoes. And the shoe, they asked the shoe, how far have I gone? And the shoe said, you have gone 2.5 miles. Sadaqa Rasulullah. I believe in it. I mean, really, that's why people say, how do you prove the existence of God? No, I can prove to you the existence of the messenger of God. And that he spoke the truth, that he's al-Amin. If you look at the hadith of Ibn Mas'ud, that's in the 40 hadiths of Imam Nawawi, he talks about how we're created in the stomach, right? If you look how that hadith, it's the only hadith in the entire hadith literature that I've ever seen that is predicated by a statement of Ibn Mas'ud where he says, I heard the messenger of Allah say, وَهُوَ الصَّادِقَ الْمَصْدُوقِ. And he is believed, he speaks the truth, and he should be believed. And then he goes on to tell about the creation that you begin as a nutfa for 40 days, and then you begin a mudgha, and he gives the whole explanation. Now, 1,400 years later, I have a book in my library written by an embryologist named Keith Moore. He's a professor of embryology from Canada. He wrote a textbook on embryology. He said the first accurate description of embryological development came from the Prophet Muhammad. Now Ibn Mas'ud was listening to that, and he felt compelled to predicate that statement by saying, I know this sounds crazy. That really, that's essentially what he was saying. I know this sounds very far-fetched, but the one I heard it from is as-sadiq wal-masduq. He's truthful and he's believed. That's what he was saying, because he was telling him what was happening in the womb. Now, for centuries, people thought that there was something called a homunculus, that there was a tiny little man inside the womb that grew. It started as, but the Prophet described the zygote. The Quran says that he describes it as a mixed fluid, that it's mixed. Well, how did that come from? Where did that come from? These are the type of things. You can get into the i'jaz of the Quran that relates to linguistics. To me, the most powerful i'jaz is linguistics, but it takes a long time to learn it, to study rhetoric. Just like Maryam, she was a virgin, and she gave birth to Isa alayhi salam. So a virgin gives birth, that's a miracle. Well, a book comes from an unlettered man, a man that can't read or write, and he produces a book. It's a miracle. It's like a virgin birth. You show me anybody in this culture that can't read or write, or anywhere on the world, that can write a book that has truths that we're still studying today. We're still discovering things in it. That's a miracle. That's the whole point of the miracle of the Quran. I'jaz al-Quran. But people don't think. They don't want to study these things. They don't want to read it with any seriousness. I tried reading the Quran. I found it's all garbled. No, you're garbled. Seriously, if you go out one night and look at the stars, you won't see any order. You'll just see a bunch of lights thrown together. There's no order up there. You can say there's no order up there. It's just a bunch of lights. But if you go out every night and start looking at those lights, suddenly, those stars are always together. Oh, they move there. Oh, on this day, that star appears on the horizon. On this day, that star sets. That takes centuries. People studied the stars. The Quran, it says, La aqsimu. Right? Allah swears by the book of the Quran. وَالنَّجْمِ إِذَا هَوَى, by the star when it sets. Allah swears by the star and its vastness. وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسْمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ لَا أُقْسِمُ بِمَوَاقِعِ النُّجُومِ. I swear by how I have placed the stars. وَإِنَّهُ لَقَسْمٌ لَوْ تَعْلَمُونَ عَظِيمٌ. And this, if you but knew, is a vast oath. This oath that I'm swearing by, when we look at the stars, they all look like they're together. Look at the Big Dipper. You think they're all stars lined up. Those stars are billions of miles away from each other. They're billions of miles away from each other. But they look like they're all set together because people didn't know that. Now we know that. We have the Hubble telescope that goes out and tells us how vast the universe is. Allah was saying that. But if you look at the commentaries, La uqsimu bimawaqi'i an-nujum is also the position of the ayahs in the Quran. It has the same meaning. So, وَبِالنَّجْمِ هُمْ يَهْتَدُونَ. By the stars they're guided, by the verses they're guided. But guidance by the stars takes knowledge. You have to spend time to learn how to guide yourself by the stars. And you need a dalil, you need somebody to help you out. Because you'll spend your whole lifetime before you know it, but the work's already been done. The same is true with the Quran. So for me, the greatest proof for the truth of this religion is in studying the founder of the religion, in his life, his truthfulness, and his sincerity, and you will have to come to the conclusion, this man was truthful. Not only was he truthful, he predicted things that he could not have known. Where did he get that knowledge? Allamahu shadid al-quwwa. He was taught by the one vast in power. This is the Prophet, and he's telling us all the prophets had these knowledges, but the Prophet is we believe he's the final Prophet. So his book is a proof for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a proof for him. It's mu'jizat al-Rasul. The Quran is his miracle. He's not the miracle of the Quran. The Quran is his miracle. The Quran is proving that he's truthful. And that's why people, if they're willing to study it, they'll come to these conclusions on their own. But most people aren't willing to study it. There is a scientist in France, and his name, it's an Italian name, although he's French. Bruno is his first name. He is a cosmologist. And I read about this man in Herald Tribune. And he was talking about the reason he became a cosmologist is because he wanted to study the heavens and particularly the signs, trying to read them, what they mean for us. And it sounded very much like a Muslim, so I looked it up, and sure enough, he had become a Muslim, this man. Now this man is considered in the top 10 cosmologists in the world in terms of his credibility, the amount of papers he's written, the theories he's put forward. I read an article in which he said that the Quran, as a scientist, it was the only book he felt that he could believe in as a scientist. He could not find any other religious tradition that had a book that was so congruous with his knowledge of the modern world and science that we know. And he said what saddened him was the Muslims were obsessed with politics. He said he went to the mosque and all he heard was politics, and he said they have this book that explains the secrets of existence, and they're not even interested in it. This a Frenchman, he's up there with Stephen Hawking and these people. So this is the reality of our deen. We don't even know. He's somebody that took the time to study it. Many of these scientists, they've rejected religion because they rejected the Old Testament. They rejected the New Testament. They can't believe in a sacrificial lamb. They can't believe in certain ideas that don't seem to resonate with them in the modern world. There are many people that have rejected Hinduism. And we believe these religions were true religions. And there's still much truth in them. But there's also many things that people find hard to come to terms with. Now, people will say the same thing about Islam, but my challenge is that most of them have never really studied Islam. I mean, I was in a discussion recently with a very fine man. He was a PhD from Harvard in religious studies, but one of the things he said to me, he said, the thing that troubles me about Islam is it's theocratic. And I said, well, what do you mean by theocratic? I know what the word means, but I want to know what he meant by it. Because people use words that you might think you know what they mean, but the person using them means something very different. And that's where all miscommunication occurs. People say things all the time. And he said, well, they believe that, God should determine everything or rule everything. And I said, and he said, even politics. And I said, Muslims have never had an idea of a theocratic state. I've never heard that anywhere. In all the books I've read and usul, from what I've heard from my teachers, they've never had that idea. He said, really? I said, absolutely. In fact, there is a book by Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah called I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in, which is a beautiful book, one of the great books of usul. And in that book he has a chapter called on the prohibition of calling a fatwa the ruling of God. That you can't call a fatwa God's rule. Because a fatwa is a human attempt at trying to understand what he thinks. That's natural theology. That's even what this society believes, that laws come from our best understanding of what is the most rational and best thing for human beings. That's Islam. Only we have guidelines that were given to us, and we believe that they're divine guidelines outside of our intellect that give us that ability to navigate the world. Like, la darara wa la dirar, no harm, no reciprocating harm. That's a principle. Al-mashaqqatu tajlib al-taysir, hardship should facilitate ease. That's a principle. Al-umur bi maqasidiha, all matters should be determined by the ends or the aims of what they're intending. These are principles that we've been given by our religion. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives these. So this is a preface to what creed is. The idea that we believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we believe that our belief is founded upon reason. It's reasonable to believe that the Prophet was a messenger, because if you study his prophecies, you will have to conclude that this is the life of somebody that had supernatural aid. Something outside of nature. That's the only conclusion you could come to in studying his life. Now, I would say that about Moses, but Moses is not a historical character. You can't prove Moses existed by history. There are people that don't believe Moses existed. Now, we believe Moses existed because he's mentioned in the Quran. Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, I don't know. They They say he walked on water. I don't have a problem with that personally, but we don't have any real historical accounts of those miracles. We don't. There aren't any historical accounts of that. There's the Gospels, but the Gospels, there's a whole school in Germany that doesn't even believe the Gospels are real. They think they were completely made up, fabricated. They think Jesus is an amalgam of several different pre-Christian deities, like Apollo and Egyptian Horus and Mithra and different. I mean, that's a view, but nobody can deny the historicity of the Prophet ﷺ without appearing to be a fool, because he was born into the light of history. We have historical accounts, and even his detractors. We know what they said about him. They were recorded, and none of them objected to what was being said. We know certain things that happened. We know in the year of the Ida fi Quraysh, in Am al-Fil, we know that that's mutawatir, that elephants attempted to destroy. Abraha came with an army with elephants, attempted to destroy the Kaaba, and birds came, Tayran Ababil, and dropped pellets on these elephants, and the army was vanquished. And Wad al-Muhassir, we go there and Hajj. That's a historical event. None of the Quraysh denied that. When that was revealed, they said, oh, Asatir al-Awwal. They didn't say that, because there were eyewitnesses alive that had actually seen that event. They witnessed it. All the people of Mecca saw that event. And after that, what did the Arabs call the Quraysh? What did they call them? Ahlullah. The people of God. In other words, don't mess with Quraysh. Because the last guy that tried to mess with them, birds appeared out of nowhere and destroyed his army. That was a sign for the people. They had awe of the Quraysh. That was in preparation for the greatest son of the Quraysh. That's what it was. It was preparation to have awe of this tribe. The Quraysh. Don't mess with Quraysh. Those are the people of God. So this is why anybody that deepens their knowledge their iman will strengthen, it will increase, they will get stronger faith. Wallahi, the more that you study this religion, the more your faith increases. If you do it with those things that will help, because there's people that study more and more and they grow in their kufr. And that's because they're not studying it to seek the truth, they're studying it to try and invalidate it. If you look at somebody like Marmaduke Pickthall, who began his study of Islam for other reasons, but he was a disinterested student. He wasn't trying to prove Islam was false like some people. He wanted to just study the religion. He became Muslim. Many people that happens. There are other people that study it to disprove it. So they find what they're looking for. I mean, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in the Quran that He leads astray many people by the Quran. يُضِلُّ بِهِ كَثِيرًا. He will lead people astray by the Quran. So the essence of our faith is belief, and the essence of that belief is a mushahada, a witnessing, an experience of the truth of it. That it has to be real for you. And the reality of that, there are different ways. For common people, very simple people that don't study a lot, that the more actions of obedience that you do, the stronger your faith will get. I mean, this is a fact. That iman tazidu bil-ta'at wa tanqusu bil-ma'asiyah. It increases with good deeds, and it decreases with misdeeds, foul deeds, disobedience. So the more that you do, the more charity that you give, the more recitation, the more fasting, the more help, visiting the sick, helping the orphans, taking care of needy people, doing those things, building masajid, doing ta'mir, helping bring places to life like the masajid, things like that, your faith will go up. Coming to the masjid to study, to learn, your faith will go up. Those things will increase your faith. So there's an experiential increase of faith that really is something that happens. It's not a type of rational faith. But there's also an increase of knowledge. that will also help your faith strengthen, especially for people, excuse me, for people that have doubts, shukuk. There are people that have doubts that come to them. Now, everybody is going to get doubts. Ya'tarihim shak. Everybody. It's just part of being human. You'll have doubts, shaitan. You'll have waswasa. That's just part of being human. The Prophet ﷺ, a man came to him and he said, I get thoughts that are so terrible, I would never say them to anybody. And the Prophet said, that's pure faith. Sarih al-iman. The fact that you would never say them to anybody, that you're troubled by them. That is faith. That you, Sidi Ahmed Zarruq said, thank you. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq said, وَمَا يُوَسْوِسُ بِهِ الشَّيْطَانُ وَالْقَلْبُ يَأْبَاهُ هُوَ الْإِيمَانُ. That what shaitan whispers in the heart and the heart rejects, that is iman. And that's one of the beauties of our religion, is that we actually, like in some religious traditions, people get all this guilt about themselves. They start hating themselves because they have things in their heart that's horrible and they think it's them. So they actually begin filled with self-hatred and loathing, and I'm going to flagellate myself, I'm horrible, I'm terrible. We don't pay any attention to that because we know that it's not us. It's waswasa, and we reject that waswasa. And if you let it go, eventually it disappears. It'll stop bothering you. But that's a stage of spiritual development, and some people get it very intensely. The more they focus on it, the more difficult it gets, until it moves into what, in modern parlance, they term it like obsessive-compulsive thoughts and behavior. Okay. So now, I wish if it wasn't this many people, I would open it up for question, but I just don't. That's okay. I think so. But if people want to write question and send it up, maybe somebody could filter out some of the questions. If people want to do that. So anyway, now to talk a little bit about the Aqidah itself of Imam al-Tahawi. I mentioned earlier that you have usul in Aqidah and then you have furu', you have branches. Now, some of the debates that occur in our communities here, like in the Deobandi community, in the Brazil community, you get debates. A lot of these debates are actually informed by these furu', where people get into details that are not about the essence of the Aqidah, and then they create disunity, they split the community, and they cause a lot of problems in our community. And that is why, particularly for people that are not scholars, they shouldn't even be discussing these things. They should not be discussing these things at all. And that's why learning a text like the Creed of Imam Tahawi is very important, because if you study these texts, if it's not in there, you shouldn't worry about it. If the issue's not in there, it's not something that you should worry about, because the other issues are problematic. Now, Sheikh Abdullah bin Bayya says in the foreword, and I want to emphasize this. He says that there have been numerous commentaries from varying perspectives in schools. I recommend, however, for the general community, Ammat al-Muslimin, that it be memorized as it is, free of any speculations about matters, the true nature of which can never be comprehended or even grasped. In other words, the best thing to do is study the text and don't go into the details of the text, because you don't need to do that. There are certain people, scholars, especially scholars that are involved in interfaith dialogue, that are involved in da'wah, then they need to have more detailed knowledge to deal with obfuscation, doubtful matters, things that are asked, questions that are asked. But for common people that aren't involved in those type things, they really don't need to delve into those. And so that's what he's recommending. And then he says something very important. Any believer who wishes to deepen his or her knowledge in this religion should follow two courses. The first is to occupy oneself with those matters of faith that concern the heart and its state, ahwal al-qalb. if you look in the Quran says, يَوْمَ لَا يَنْفَعُ مَعْنُونَ إِلَّا مَنْ أَتَى اللَّهَ بِقَلْبٍ سَلِيمٍ. On that day, nothing will avail a human being. Nothing will avail a human being. Neither wealth nor children. Only the one who brings to God a sound heart. That's the only thing that's going to avail you on the day of judgment, is salamat al-qalb, is a sound heart. A heart free of kibr, free of pride, free of envy, free of greed, free of lust, free of sloth, of wrath, all of these harmful things. That is the only thing that will avail you on the day of judgment. And so that's what he's writing. And that's waqfat al-ula, because we know that there's shafa'ah from the Prophet ﷺ, shafa'ati li ahl al-kaba'iri min ummati, my intercession for the people of big wrong actions from this ummah. But the Prophet said, help me, help you. Right? There's a hadith in which he said, help me, help you. By some night prayers, doing that extra work to help the Prophet ﷺ. So don't just come on the day of judgment complete muflis, bankrupt. No, you have to do the work. That's the point, because we believe in faith indeed. So he says that you should occupy yourself with matters of the heart and estate, as well as purification of the ego, tazkiyatun nafs, of how you purify the nafs, enabling one to ascend to the degree of spiritual excellence, ihsan, maqam al-ihsan. And then the second involves a course of study of practical jurisprudence in order to acquire the divine injunction and rectify one's transactions and contracts. Fiqh is very important in our ummah. Unfortunately, one of the things about our community is we've lost the centrality of our ethics. Much of fiqh is ethics. And many of the people in our community have lost that ethical centrality. So when you know legal rulings, when you know what's important for you, then you can act accordingly. It's very important to know that. So that's what he's telling us. I'll give you one example. There was a woman in America who became Muslim, and her husband was not a Muslim. And she asked, several Muslims told her that she had to divorce her husband, and that she was living in sin with her husband. Now, she almost left Islam because of that. But she came to me and she asked me that question after being told by all these people. She said, I'm being told. And I said, is your husband, does he respect your religion? She said, no, he encourages me. And I said, then you don't have to divorce him. It's fine. Your marriage is fine. Now that is an opinion that I learned from my teacher, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, who is a faqih and an alim. It's also a position that was taught by some of the brothers that studied in Tarim with the Hadarima fuqaha there. And this is an opinion. That opinion exists. Now there are other opinions that say the other, but fiqh is human understanding. Yes, there is a verse that clearly states that believing women don't go under the authority of disbelieving men. But you contextualize things in the Quran are contextualized. So that woman, after 6 months, her husband became Muslim. Now they're both Muslim. So because the fiqh was there to facilitate her, we gained 2 believers. But we could have driven 2 people out of Islam without fiqh, and that's why fiqh is so important. And fiqh is vast. You can't limit your understanding to one madhab when you're working with all these people and think that's the ruling of God. That's not the ruling of God. That's the ruling of Abu Hanifa. That's the ruling of Malik. That's the ruling of Imam Shafi. That's not Allah's ruling. That is human understanding of what they think God meant. And that the people that are involved in giving fatwa, they're involved in fiqh, they have to understand that fiqh is not sharia. Sharia is divine law. Fiqh is human understanding of divine law. And they're 2 different things. And the madhabs are 70% ijtihadat. Most of them are ahkam dhanniya. They're not absolute. They're not written in stone. And we follow them, and I believe in the madhab. And we should follow the madhabs, and I believe in the mashhur of the madhab. But you can't turn madhab into idolatry. You can't make the madhab the idol. The madhab is not God. God is beyond madhabs. The Prophet was beyond madhabs. Really, all of the madhabs come from him. He's bigger than the madhabs. The Prophet was not a Hanafi or a Shafi or a Maliki or a Hanbali or a Ja'fari or a Thawri or a Tabari. All of them are deriving from him. He's bigger than all of them. So don't limit the religion to any one of these men. Because you're doing a disservice to the religion. And in the end, you constrict it until people can't fit in it. That's why there's so much vastness in the religion, for people to fit in it. There's room for a lot of people. No, I just want me and my friends. الضيق في القلوب. The constriction is in the hearts. The Arabs say that when lovers are gathered, a carpet is like a vast desert. Small carpet, if lovers are sitting on it, it's like a vast desert. But they said, but when enemies come together, a vast desert is like a small carpet, constricted. They say that two kings can't sit on one kalim. Kalim is a Turkish carpet, but 1,000 dervishes can sit on one. Two kings cannot sit in one iqlim. Iqlim is like a province, but 1,000 dervishes can sit on one kilim. When ego is gone, people can come together, but when no, I'm right, you're wrong. This is my dominion. Then people can't come together. And the Prophet was bringing people together. He wasn't doing that. So that's what he's saying. Learn fiqh. Fiqh is vast. When I told Shaykh Abdullah about that, I said, that's from your hasanat. You didn't even know it, but two people, their Islam was from your hasanat because you taught me. Because if he had taught me that, I would have told them, no, you can't do that, because I didn't know that ruling. What I was taught from my teachers, if a Muslim woman converted and the husband didn't convert, there was fisq, nullified the marriage. That's what I was taught. That's a dominant opinion in the Maliki madhab. But his knowledge is vaster than mine, and he told me that, so I had that knowledge. And that's why it's very dangerous to give judgments about things, especially in these very prickly matters, difficult matters. And then also, one should avoid any disputation and debate about theological matters that are predicated on earlier philosophical problems that may no longer serve the current religious discourse or the materialistic intellectual challenges confronting the prevailing cultural environment. There's a lot of things Muslims talked about in the past that are no longer relevant to us. And one of the things he says about the creed of Imam Tahawi, it's a general call to abandon accusations of disbelief, what's called takfir. Another major problem we have in our community is Muslims calling other Muslims disbelievers. The only thing I can say, if you're not frightened by the mutawatir hadith, this is a hadith that all the Sahaba knew, that whoever calls a man a kafir, one of them is kafir. Man kaffara Musliman ba'a ahaduhuma bil kufri. One of them is kafir. So if you say he's a kafir, one of you is kafir. It's either him or you. So if you want to risk your faith, because making takfir of another Muslim is kufr. The Prophet said that takfiruhu kaqatri, it's like killing him. And if you intentionally kill somebody, al-khulud fi an-nar. So it's very important to avoid takfir of Muslims. And then there's people that say, if taraqat al-yahudu, the Prophet ﷺ, it's a sahih hadith related by many of our scholars. If taraqat al-yahud ila ithnatayn aw ihda aw ithnatayn, و70 فرقة وافترقت أو تفرقت النصارى إلى 72 فرقة وستفترق أمتي إلى 73 فرقة. And then in different روايات كلها في النار إلا واحدة ولا تنجو منها إلا واحدة. Only one is saved, all of them are in the fire except for one. They said, Man hum ya Rasulullah, describe them, ma ana alayhi wa ashabi, what I'm doing and my companions. So there are people that claim to be in that group. Well, watch out for claims. If you look in Imam Qurtubi's tafsir, when it says, وَإِذَا قِيلَ لَهُمْ لَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ قَالَ إِنَّمَا نَحْنُ مُصْلِحُونَ. And if it's said to them, don't sow corruption in the earth, they say, we're not sowing corruption, we're rectifying. Imam Qurtubi says, the first proof that they're sowing corruption is they claim to be rectifying. Because true people that rectify never make the claims. And that's why Sidi Ahmed Zarruq has a qaida. One of his principles is, مَنْ أَدَعَ رُتْبَةً لَيْسَتْ لَهُ فُضِحَ بِشَوَاهِدِ الْإِمْتِحَانِ. Whoever claims a rank that is not his, Allah will expose him for the fraud that he is. وَمَنْ يَدَّعَ رُتْبَةً هِيَ لَهُ نُزِعَ مِنْهَا إِلَى رُتْبَةٍ دُونَهَا. And whoever claims to have a rank that he truly has, the rank will be taken away from him and he'll be sent to a lower rank. وَمَنْ يَدَّعَ رُتْبَةً دُونَ رُتْبَتِهِ رُفِعَ إِلَى رُتْبَةٍ أَعْلَى مِنْهَا. And whoever claims to a rank that is less than his rank, God will elevate him to a higher rank. And that's why when Imam Ali was asked, radiallahu anhu, one of his cousins asked him, who's the best person after Abu Bakr, after the Prophet? He said, Abu Bakr. He said, and then who? He said, Umar. And he said, I didn't want to say, and then who, out of fear, he would say Uthman. Because this is his cousin, he wanted to hear him say me. And so he said, وَأَنْتَ يَا أَمِيرَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. What about you? And he said, مَا أَنَا إِلَّا رَجُلٌ مِّنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. I'm just a man from the Muslims. That's how Imam Ali saw himself, and that's why Allah elevated him to the highest stature. So making claims to be from this firqa, the saved sect, good luck. Seriously, good luck on the Day of Judgment. If you're claiming that you're following everything the Prophet said, ma ana alayhi wa ashabi, exactly what I'm doing and what my companions were doing, ma ana alayhi wa ashabi, you're making that claim, good luck. Seriously, it's completely insane for somebody to believe that. That they're living exactly as the Prophet ﷺ lived. No, we would hope, may Allah make al-hiqna bis-salihin, may Allah cause us to be amongst those people. You know, the famous story, it's in the Muslim tradition of Isa, that he was walking and one of the Hawariyun was with him, a disciple, and a thief saw them, and he said, SubhanAllah, a prophet of God and his disciple. And he said, I would just to draw near to them. And so he started walking behind them. And the disciple looked and he recognized he was a thief. And he started giving him dirty looks like, get away, how dare you walk near us, righteous people. And so in the tradition it says that Allah revealed to Isa to kick that disciple out and exchange him with the thief. Because the thief didn't think he was anybody. The disciple thought, oh, I'm with the Prophet. Who's he? Who does he think he is? Like the Imam and the Muazzin. When the Imam, he was praying in the mihrab and he realized that he was nothing and he fell down and he started saying, Ana la shay, I'm nothing, wallahi. And then the Muazzin came in, he saw him and he said, Subhanallah, if the Imam, he knows 10 qira'at, he knows the Sahih Bukhari, he has all, and he's nothing. What am I? He fell down, I'm nothing. And then the man who swept the mosque out, he came in, he said, if the Imam is nothing and the Muazzin is nothing, what am I? He fell down, he started saying, I'm nothing. The Imam looked over, he said to the Muazzin, look who thinks he's nothing. So, spiritual pride is a big problem. Inshallah, people take a break for 15 minutes. Come back inshallah in 15 minutes. Jazakumullah khairan. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam taslima. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Alhamdulillah. I just want to say that anybody that wants the book signed, inshallah, I won't leave until I sign their book. So after we finish, inshallah, anybody that wants a book signed, just try to do it so we don't hurt anybody. I was at the Kaaba once, and there was so many people there, and we were moving towards the Black Stone, and when I got there, my head got stuck next to a person. We were both stuck in the Black Stone, and there were so many people we couldn't get out. And I looked, and it was a friend of mine that I hadn't seen for like about 10 years. I couldn't believe it. We both just said, Subhanallah. What a good place to meet. Yeah, you couldn't have made an appointment like that. I'll see you at the Black Stone. So, another time I took Yahya Rodas. This is a true story, which shows you what a good person he is. I took him to the you know, there were so many people there. It was the first time he's ever in Mecca, and he's very blonde and light skinned, so he looks European. So I went up to the Saudi, and I had like Saudi type dress on, and I said to him, "Ya akhi, hada Amriki aslam jadidan, yurid an yuqabbal al-hajar." It was the time when, you know, when they guard, they don't let people kiss it. So I took him up there, and so I said, you know, this is an American convert. He came all the way from he's never kissed a stone. And he said, "Oh, marhaban, tafaddal." Before they hated Americans, but so he kissed it, and then I was going to take my turn. He pushed me away. He said, "Just him." I said, "Okay." He thought I was Arab. Yeah, the Americans, they say, why do they hate us, right? Well, drop bombs on people, they tend not to like you. So the Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, there's a few things. Traditionally, when you study a science, you learn what are called the Mabadi al-Ashara, so I want to go through those quickly. The first one is the had, which is the definition of the science. And the definition of the science is, this is the science that clarifies what we are obliged to believe about God and His Messenger. That's the definition of Aqidah. It's al-ilm alladhi yubayyinu ma huwa wajibun i'tiqaduhu fi haqqi Allahi wa fi haqqi rusulihi. It's what the science that clarifies what you believe about Allah and His messengers. And then ismuhu, the name, which is the second one, ismuhu is usul ad-din. It's also called al-aqidah or ilm al-aqaid, the knowledge of creed. And in later they called it ilm al-kalam, and a person that specialized in it was called mutakallim. Some of the early people did not like to use that word, but the reason that it became known as ilm al-kalam is probably because one of the central issues when the science originated was about the creation of the Quran, whether the Quran was kalam Allah makhluq or kalam Allah ghair makhluq. The Hanbalis held to the position that it's ghair, and the Mu'tazila said that it was makhluq, and the later scholars from the Ash'ira and the Maturidiyya found a middle position that the Quran is kalam Allah ghair makhluq, and then they would just say that the written book, we don't apply that to it, or the recitation, any of those things, so that you didn't get into difficulty. But that ta'adduban, we say that the Mus'haf We call it Kalam Allah, and we don't believe that it's created, but we don't believe that the book itself, the physical book, is uncreated, because that lends credence to Christian view of God coming into the world, because the book is an attribute of Allah. Sifat Allah. Al-Kalam sifa min sifatihi. It's an attribute of Allah. Wa-sifa la tufariq al-mawsuf. An attribute does not depart or separate from the one attributed to it. So when we say Al-Quran Kalam Allah, it's the meaning of that is the eternal meanings of Allah's speech. So that was kind of a compromised position. And then the istimdaduhu, which is the sources of the science. Istimdaduhu, the sources where it's deriving its principles from, is the al-adilla al-naqliya wal-aqliya. It's proofs that are from revelation and proofs that are from reason. So there's an element of reason in this. For instance, the whole debate about the Quran, part of that is aqli. It's not just naqli. The aql ya'ba. And the early people didn't want to talk about it because the Prophet ﷺ did not mention it. They didn't want to talk about it. And their general disdain for anything that the Prophet did not mention in Aqidah was very important. But because other people were bringing this up, the Christians wanted to know, when you say that Jesus is the kalima, the Word of God, Word is uncreated, so is He the uncreated Word of God? So these were the type of questions that were being asked, and the ulama had to refute these questions. So the istimdad is from there, and you have two things in art. One is called taswiriyah, and the other is tasdiqiyah. Taswiriyah is how you conceptualize something. You have to conceptualize something before you can make a judgment about it. This is really important in our tradition. Before you can make a judgment about something, you have to conceptualize it. What many people often do is judge things before they've conceptualized it. That's called prejudice. So anything that you say is either true or false, you have to understand what it is. الحكم على شيء فرع عن تصوره. Ahl al-Bayan say, judging a thing is predicated upon conceptualizing that thing fully. So you fully understand it. So when you say, I believe in God, you have to understand what that means. You have to know what belief means, and you have to know what ilah means. Amantu billah. I believe in Allah. You have to know what that means. So the definition of belief, right, is iqrarun fil qalb, or jazmun fil qalb. It's a certainty in the heart. The definition of God, I already gave it to you. It's al-mustaghni an al-kull, wal-kull al-muftaqirun ilayh. It's the necessary reality, being, that is independent and everything's dependent on it. So when you say, I believe in God, that's what you're saying. I have certainty in my heart that a being exists that has no need of anything and everything is in need of it. So what you're making a judgment about creation, about the world, that everything is dependent. And I believe that it's all dependent on that which is not dependent, that which is independent. So that's the tasawwur. You have the dependent and independent, and then there's your tasdeeq, what you decide about it. And it's very important. So that's really what the istimdad is on these proofs. And then you have hukmuhu, which is its legal ruling. The hukm of this science is fard ayn, to learn the basic things. Like this text is considered fard ayn. Every Muslim has to learn the basics of the text. Now, my teacher Murabit al-Hajj said, if somebody knows Surah al-Ikhlas and understands it well, then they are considered a believer. And that's why Ikhlas, I mean, it's amazing that God gave us that surah. And I'll tell you one story about that surah that really hit home for me the meaning of that surah. I was in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates when I was studying there years ago. And there was some Bedouin, and this Bedouin young man asked me, and he had a stick. You know, the Bedouin there have these sticks for the camels. And he had the stick, and he said, what were you before you were a Muslim? And I said, I was Christian. He said, what do they believe? And I said, well, they believe Jesus is Son of God. And he said, that makes sense. And I looked at him, I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he didn't have a mother. And so that makes sense. ما كان عنده فالله هو الذي أوجده فهو أبوه. Like, it's very simple. And the other Bedouin who was next to him took his stick and hit him really hard and said, لم يلد ولم يولد. I mean, he just really let him have it and said that, لم يلد ولم يولد. And it amazed me that these two very simple people, you know, that Allah made every Muslim a theologian with Surah Al-Ikhlas. That if you really understand Surah Al-Ikhlas, you're a theologian. Because it's all in that chapter. I'm really not exaggerating. If you really have a deep understanding of Ikhlas, it's all in that chapter. I mean, it really is the essence of our Tawheed. And that's why it's a third of the Quran. Because a third of the Quran is sacred history. A third of the Quran is the Ahkam. And a third of the Quran is Tawheed. And all of Tawheed is in Ikhlas. So, Imam al-Sanusi, some of the early scholars were of the opinion that if you did not know Tawheed with proofs and adillah and couldn't prove it, that you weren't a Muslim. Ridiculous. I mean, that unfortunately was a position that was put out there. And some people in Nigeria, I've read about this problem between some of these students that were saying these aren't Muslim because they haven't learned Barahin, you know, Imam Sanusi's text. It's ridiculous, this type of thing. But unfortunately, we have this in our community. So now, in terms of taqleed, is taqleed acceptable? Well, Imam As-Subki said it's acceptable under one condition. Because taqleed is to believe in the words of another person without having the proofs of the person that's telling you. So if your sheikh tells you that dating is haram, for instance, you don't have a hukm. The sheikh will have, you know, la taqrabu zina, don't even go near fornication. So dating is a means to that. So that's where they get that ruling. It's called sadd al-dhara'i', that you cut off the pretext of something to prevent something worse from happening. So he might not know that, but he just said, la, my sheikh said it, so it's true. Well, if your sheikh told you also Allah is one and not three, and you say, I believe it was, but my sheikh said so. Well, what's the proof? My sheikh, he's the proof. Well, Imam Subki said that was only valid if the belief was so rooted that if your sheikh ended up becoming a Christian, you didn't. So he said that the taqleed was acceptable if the belief was rooted enough that you would not lose your faith if the one that you were following lost his faith. And that obviously is something that only Allah can assess. So our assumptions about people is that we should believe that they're believers, and Allah will decide that. In terms of learning it with all of its adillah and barahin and the proofs and all the rational proofs, that is considered a fard kifaya. A certain group amongst the ummah has to learn ilm al-tawheed. So Imam al-Tahawiyyah, this level it's considered a fard ayn, to learn the basic principles of what Muslims believe. But in terms of like Jawharat al-Tawheed or the Aqidah Nasafiyah and the Shuruh Tabtazani and others, to go into that, the Burhan, the Muhassal of al-Razi, these are books that are for scholars to learn, and you don't really want people that don't have the type of intellectual training that's necessary to navigate those books to be reading them, because they'll get confused. And there's a famous story of Fakhruddin al-Razi. He was a great theologian, and he was walking, and all these students were with him, and this old woman said, "Who's that?" She said, "Who's that?" The student said, "That's Fakhruddin al-Razi. He has 70 proofs for the existence of God." And so the woman said, if he didn't have 70 doubts, he wouldn't need 70 proofs. And when Fakhruddin heard that, he said, "Alaykum bi iman al-ajaiz." You should have the faith of old women. So, and then also Sidi Ahmed Zarruq said something very interesting. He said that some of the ulama have said that those who look into the books of Kalam, it's like looking with your bare eyes. It'll just blind you. The more you look, the more blind you get. And that's why, again, faith is something, that's why that quote that I put at the beginning of this text, I put that for a very important reason, that faith is really a light that Allah puts in the heart of people, and that light should be guarded and nurtured and strengthened with the fuel of good deeds. Because, the more fuel, the more energy. If you have 70 watt, gives you more light. Well, the way you increase the wattage of your faith is through good deeds. But the foundation of the faith is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's very important. And then the masailuhu, which are those things that the science studies, it's Zatullah wa sifatuhu, right? And then the wajibat, the mustahilat, and the jaizat, what's necessary for God, what's conceivable, what's inconceivable. Impossible is translated sometimes the mustahilat as what's impossible for God. I don't like saying that, because to say it's impossible for God is problematic to me in Arabic, because qudra, Allah is qadirun ala kulli shay. And passe in Latin means power. And so impossible means not having the power. I prefer the word inconceivable, to say that that's inconceivable for God. So the idea, can God lift a rock, make a rock so heavy he can't lift? We would say that's inconceivable. That once you've defined God, you can't make a statement like that. It's an inconceivable statement. It's a waste of time. Saint Augustine had a witty remark about that. He said he could, but he's busy preparing hell for people that ask questions like that. And then you have also the fada'iluhu or fadruhu, the virtue of this science. The virtue of any knowledge is based on the virtue of the subject matter of that knowledge. And because the subject matter is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger, this is considered the highest. We have three basic sciences in Islam: Aqidah, or Usul al-Din, Fiqh, and then Ihsan, or the akhlaq of the religion. And this one is the highest because it's the foundation of the others. The foundation of the others. Fiqh means nothing until you believe in Allah. Ihsan is done because of Allah. أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. To worship Allah as if you see Him, and if you don't see Him, you know He sees you. So this is the highest. And then the subject matter again is Allah and His Messenger. So the masailuhu are the mustahilat, the wajibat, and the jaizat. The subject matter is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His Messenger, and also the akhirah, which is eschatology, what happens when you die, the hold, the basin, all these things. And we have a very vivid tradition that indicates that. And then you have wadi'uhu, which is the founder of this knowledge. Now, for instance, grammar was founded technically by Imam Ali, because he was the first to tell. Abu Aswad al-Du'ali was with his daughter, and Abu Aswad al-Du'ali said, Ma ajmar as-sama', which can mean how beautiful is the sky. It's like ta'ajjub. But she said it, Ma ajmar as-sama', and she made the ism tafdeel, she made it marfu'. And so it's really a question, what's the most beautiful thing in the sky? And Abu Aswad said, an-nujum, the stars. And she said, no, I didn't mean that. I meant it's beautiful tonight. So it troubled him so much that his daughter made that mistake in the Arabic that he went to Imam Ali and he said, Awladuna yalhanun, our children are speaking ungrammatically. And so Imam Ali said to him, then you should put down the rules of speaking correctly. And then he told him, al-kalamu ismun wa fi'lun wa harfun yanqasimu ila ismin wa fi'lin wa harf fanhu hadha nahu. All of speech is divided into nouns, verbs, and like prepositions, and then he said, so follow that path. So he said, fanhu hadha nahu. So it became ilm al-nahu. And Abu Aswad is the first one to start putting those down. Then the Persians developed it, Sibawi and others developed it into a science. Well, now it's considered fard kifaya to learn Arabic grammar. You have to learn it. The ummah, it's obligation. Sahaba didn't know grammar. I mean, they knew it intuitively. They didn't know it like we learn it today. ضرب زيد عمر, the ضرب is fi'l madi, mabni ala fatha, all those things. They didn't learn that type of grammar. So when you look at where this science comes from, technically it's a Quranic science, because basically all these meanings are gleaned from the Quran and mutawatir hadith. Most of the ulama do not accept hadith that are not mutawatir for issues of creed. If it's ahad hadith, they tend to, even if it's a sound hadith in Sahih Bukhari or something like that, they tend to, because these are matters upon which there has to be absolute and utter certainty. And so the ulama were very wary of having ahad hadith as a basis of creed, because the probability of error is there, even if it's slight. And to call somebody a disbeliever because they're rejecting something that does have a probability of error, they considered that not fair. And so they were very cautious. Now there's certain things that reach the level of tawatur in different ways. For instance, the hadith about adhab al-qabr. There are so many of those hadiths that the ulama have said you should believe in the adhab al-qabr. The same is true, for instance, for the Mahdi. Most of the ulama say that they've reached a level, and there's different types of tawatur, because you have ma'nawi, lafzi, sometimes it's meaning. What the qaida about the Mahdi is, sahihuhu ghayru sarih wa sarihuhu ghayru sahih. The hadiths that are absolutely sound about the Mahdi are never unambiguous. كيف بكم إذا نزل فيكم عيسى ibn Maryam وإمامكم منكم. That's a sahih hadith, but it's not clear that it's the Mahdi, but it indicates the Mahdi. Whereas the hadiths that clearly say the Mahdi, ismuhu ka ismi wa ism abi ka ism abi, those hadiths tend not to have the level of, but there's so many of those hadiths that most of the creeds will discuss that, although some of the great ulama of our tradition did not believe in the Mahdi, so you can't really say somebody's a kafir if they don't believe in that. So it's very important to recognize that there are furu' about this. Ibn Khaldun was of that opinion because of a tradition that states La Mahdi illa Isa, the only Mahdi is Isa, things like that. So these are debates that people got into, but this all involves the masail of getting into what is discussed about this. So the wadi'uhu is, technically it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who gave us this through His messenger. But in this specific formulation, it comes initially, probably the first of the great masters of this is Abu Hanifa radiallahu anhu. I mean, he really lays down a lot of the principles that will later be articulated. But you find Hasan al-Basri was somebody before him, and some of the early tabi'een that were dealing with the obfuscations, the shubuhat that were coming into the community. But Abu Hanifa, and then also Imam al-Tahawiyyah, who is a student and makes the claim that this is Abu Hanifa's aqidah, and the aqidah of his two greatest students. So, but from these early formulations, you have fiqh al-akbar, because that's what Abu Hanifa called this. Fiqh al-asghar is the legal rules, fiqh al-akbar is the fiqh of aqidah. That's what he called it. So, and then you have, from that came two great theologians, Abu Hasan al-Ash'ari and Abu Mansur al-Maturidi. And these are both late 3rd century scholars. And basically, they were refuting the Mu'tazilite and other people, the Khawarij, and they developed and formulated creeds. And just to clarify something about the Ash'ari, I mean, I was trained in Ash'ari Aqidah. That's what I learned. That's what most of my teachers followed. And some of them they had ta'assub and rejected anything outside of that. I mean, they did that. Later, I came to recognize that there are valid positions like what's called an athari tradition. I mean, that is a valid tradition, and this is probably closer to athari creed. But to be fair to Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari, his madhab there's two. There's the madhab of Abu al-Hasan al-Ash'ari himself, and then there's the madhab of his school. And his school is very different from him. It's not really fair to say that the Ash'ari Aqidah is Abu al-Hasan. Abu al-Hasan's Aqidah is pretty much the Aqidah of Imam Tahawiyyah, with the exception of 4 masail that are Hanafi masail. So it's important to note that early Aqidah of the Ash'aris was not like the later Ash'ari creed that you got with Imam Baqallani and others. And this causes a lot of misunderstanding in the community. But our belief, and I really want you to understand this, our belief, the belief that I was taught, my teachers like Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya and others, is that the valid creeds of this ummah are basically 3. The creeds of people like Abu Hanifa and Imam al-Tahawi, which are Athari creeds, and then the creed of Abu Mansur al-Maturidi, the Maturidiyya school, and the Ash'ari school, that these are all valid schools. Now they do differ in the furu', but they do not differ in their usul. A lot of these people that focus on creed and attack people and what they talk about are the sifat. There's an agreement about the sifat, with the exception of certain names that are used in the Quran, like yad and wajh and these things. Muslims shouldn't go into those debates. They should avoid those debates like the plague. It's just diseases in people's hearts. If people are interested in those things, they have a sickness in their heart. And people should just avoid that. The Ash'ari position is ta'wil and tafwid are both acceptable positions. To make ta'wil, which is to interpret those meanings. But the early position and the safer position is tafwid. Allahu a'lam. When Allah says that istawa ala al-arsh, we believe in it. When He says that linguistically it means ascended the throne, we believe in it. Ala muradillah, whatever Allah meant by it, but we're not going to go into the details. And we definitely know that it doesn't mean that He moved in a place, that He did things like people do. Hasha lillah. Allah is not in any place. He's the creator of place. That's our belief. So I don't want to go any further into it than that. But these are the acceptable imams, and they each have schools. The majority of Muslims traditionally follow the Maturidi school, and it's a beautiful school, and I think it's a school that has a lot. It has a lot of aspects that are very appropriate for the time that we're in, because of its focus on the ability of the intellect. It's not a Mu'tazilite school, but it has a lot of emphasis on human intelligence and capacity. So, and then finally, nisbatuhu, where you relate it to, what it's considered, it's from the ulum al-shar'iyyah. This is considered from the ulum al-shar'iyyah, the legal sciences that have to be learned by the Muslims in every age. So it's very important to learn these things and to follow them. And each of the scholars looks like a commentator, a mufassir, looks only at the Quran, basically. He'll look at the hadith, but to interpret the Quran. So his concern is the Quran, what it means. The muhaddith, his concern is the hadith. The faqih, his concern is the action of the mukallaf, of the responsible person. But the person who studies this science, he studies all of these other sciences are in this science. So it's really a comprehensive science. One of the things that's very interesting is that a lot of people make issues that are actually fiqh issues, creedal issues, which becomes a major problem. For instance, tawassul, which is, what people do when they ask something by the rank of the Prophet ﷺ, or tawassul Tawassul is a fiqh issue. It's not a creed issue. It's an issue of fiqh. It's usually mentioned in the Bab al-Hajj. So historically it was under fiqh because it's considered an action, and it's the faqih that determines whether actions are valid or not valid. So the idea of putting it in the Aqidah is actually quite a modern issue, things like that. So debating these. Now in this book, for those of you who got the book, there's an introduction about why I translated it, and that relates to the fact that it's an incredibly unifying creed, and the preface, and then the introduction just gives you a historical background, and then the biography. Imam Tahawiyyah was born in Upper Egypt. He was from a very extraordinary family. His mother is one of the great scholars of Islam. Her name was Ukht al-Muzani. That's how she's known as, or Tahawiyyah. She has an opinion in the Shafi'i madhab. Imam Shafi'i had such esteem for her, she sat in his circle. So she was actually a direct student of Imam Shafi'i. That's the mother of the writer of this creed. So his uncle, Imam al-Muzani, is one of the great Shafi'i scholars and a direct student. He studied directly under Imam Shafi'i. There's a lot of reasons, there's different views about why he became a Hanafi. But the dominant opinion, I think the soundest one, is that he became convinced by the arguments of the Hanafi school. I mean, some say his uncle got angry at him and said, "You're never going to amount to anything," and so he decided to study the Hanafi school. I don't believe that. I think that's disgruntled Shafi'is talking there, because they lost one of their bright stars. But he was a brilliant man. He was a master of sciences. He's a master of hadith. Ulum al-Hadith. He was a master of ilal, which is a very difficult aspect of the Hadith tradition, and he has a very important book. He was a master of the Hanafi fiqh. Some of the ulama considered him a mujtahid, although he stayed within the school of Abu Hanifa. They considered him a mujtahid because you have mujtahid mutlaq, which is somebody like Abu Hanifa, Imam Shafi'i, Imam Tabari, Imam Abi Thawr. These people are mujtahid mutlaq. And then you have mujtahid murajjih, which is muqayyad, which is somebody who's a mujtahid within the madhab, but he stays in the usul of his imam. Like Abu Yusuf and Muhammad al-Shaybani, they were mujtahidun muqayyadun. They were mujtahidun, but they were within the usul of their imam, Abu Hanifa, but they were not obliged to follow his opinions. That's a mujtahid muqayyad. The mujtahid murajjih is somebody who is able to, he doesn't have an opinion himself, but he can determine which of the opinions is the more valid one. That's a murajjih. So these are different types of independent reasoners. And he was considered, probably he was a mujtahid muqayyad, although some would say he was a mujtahid mutlaq who chose to stay within the madhab, Allahu a'lam. But one of the interesting things also about him is he has a famous statement where somebody asked him an opinion, and he gave an opinion that differed from Abu Hanifa. And the Qadi who was asking, he said, "I thought you were a Hanafi." And he said, "So what does that mean?" He said, "Well, that's not the position of Abu Hanifa." And he said, "La yuqallidu illa asabi." Nobody blindly follows somebody except a fanatic. And the Qadi said to him, "Oh, ahmaq," or an idiot. And so that became a proverb in Egypt. La yuqallidu illa asabi. Nobody blindly follows another except a fanatic. So he did not like fanaticism or obstinacy or being fixed on an opinion. He also, the rulers used to seek his counsel. He was a very humble person. His ego was completely effaced. He did not put himself forward. He was always putting other people forward. Beautiful man, erudite, and very sweet. So the introduction just talks about that aspect of him. He's buried in Cairo. His grave was once quite an impressive Mamluk tomb. It's fallen into dereliction of late, but it was once quite an extraordinary place. So he was honored by the people there. Now, the text itself, I mean, there's an ijaza, which is, I studied this with a couple of different teachers. I mean, the early texts I studied the Bulaym and Ibn Ashir's Aqidah, and then I studied the Jawhara and some of the Idatat al-Junnan, and then a few other texts, the Umar Barahin. But, you know, a few years ago, I wanted to start teaching this, and so I studied it, because I don't like to teach a book that I don't read with directly with a scholar. Because sometimes you can get an ijaza from a teacher just because they think that you're capable of teaching, so they give you ijaza to teach something, but you haven't really studied it with them. They just say, you know, I trust your abilities. But I prefer to actually read the metan, especially, at least. But I did read this with a few different teachers, and I dedicated it to one of my teachers, Shaykh Ahmed Jabir, who was an extraordinary man in Mecca. He was a Yemeni scholar, really beautiful scholar, very humble Shafi'i master, and a really, he wrote a sharh of the Aqidah of Imam Tahawiyyah, which I used when I was translating it, and he gave me permission to translate it into English. He was buried in the place where Sayyidah Khadija is buried in Mecca, and recently they dig up the graves periodically to make room for other people, and they take they dug up his grave. And I just heard this from Sheikh Abdullah al-Qadi, and the people that were, his body was still completely intact. And he was a hafiz of Quran, and you know, those are called, in Catholic tradition, they call them incorruptibles, people whose bodies don't. And it is a scientific phenomenon, so this is not magic or something. They do know. There's an article several years ago that was put in Discovery magazine in the U.S. called The Incorruptibles, phenomenon of bodies that do not decay. So there are bodies that don't decay. People see them. And we believe that it's a sign of sanctity, that people who are in a sanctified state, their bodies won't decay. So, but his body was completely intact when they dug his grave. So, anyway, this begins with, he says, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, قال العلامة حجة الإسلام أبو جعفر الوراق الطحاوي في مصر رحمه الله. هذا ذكر بيان عقيدة أهل السنة والجماعة على مذهب فقهاء الملة أبي حنيفة النعمان بن ثابت الكوفي وأبي يوسف يعقوب بن إبراهيم الأنصاري وأبي عبد الله بن محمد بن الحسن أبي عبد الله محمد بن الحسن الشيباني رضوان الله عليهم أجمعين وما يعتقدون من أصول الدين ويدينون به رب العالمين. So this praise belongs to Allah alone. And I'll tell you the reason that I translate this as God. One of the things that is happening in the West is there are a lot of people now that do not believe Muslims worship God. They think Allah is different. A lot of Christians think that we worship a moon god or something like this, and you'll see this in books. And I was at an interfaith, because I debated really long and hard about this, but I'm going to explain this to you so you understand something about my thinking. Dr. Omar Abdullah Farooq, who wrote a brilliant paper called One God, Many Names, he was one of the people that read through a couple of the drafts and gave me quite a few good suggestions. But he said that it was adamant that I translate it as God. And I did not want to do that. So I compromised and I did all the introduction, everything, and the notes, I used God, but in the actual text, I used Allah in the English. And then I was at an interfaith thing in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was asked to give a grace before the dinner. And this was all the notables of Louisville, a lot of very influential people in the city, and I got up and I read a dua of the Prophet ﷺ, Allahumma barak lana fi ma razaqtana. And I said, God, you know, oh God, bless you. When I sat down, this man, very brilliant man from Harvard, Carl Pope, he's actually president of the Sierra Club. He turned to me and he said, you know, that was very wise of you to translate that, because one of the and this man's married to a Muslim lady, so he knows the Muslim community quite well. He said one of the He said all you had to do was say one word and you would have lost the whole group in here, because they're all Christians. I said, what? And he said, Allah. He said, but because you said God, that could have been a prayer their own preacher would have said. And I really realized at that point that we have an immense barrier that we're really need to break down, and because we believe in the Abrahamic God, that this is Allah, and we know that Christians in the Arab world call God Allah. That's what they call. In fact, they call Jesus Ibn Allah, and that's what Palestinian Christians, Iraqi Christians. So, but when Muslims went into many countries, the word for God was retained in those countries, which is why the Persians, and in Urdu they say Khuda to this day. And Khuda is related to the word God. It's a cognate of the word God, probably. So, but Persians say Khuda Hafiz, and it's understood, but that was the word that they used when the Muslims came in. So the Muslims obviously didn't have a problem. No, you can't say that word. No, and that's why Imam al-Ghazali said that the names of God are tawqifiyah unless they indicate a God without any attributes. So, like, we don't say Allah is good. Good is not a name of God. You know, all good is in the presence of God, but good is not a name of God. We don't use that as a name of God. So the names of God have to be from revelation, but a name that indicates Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala without any attribution is acceptable. So that's my reasoning behind that. But in this, I'll say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because we all know that it's not a moon god. Alhamdulillah. So he says that this is from the most learned scholar of the proof of Islam, Abu Ja'far al-Warraq al-Tahawi from Egypt, may God shower him with mercy, states that the following is an exposition of the creed of the people of the prophetic way and the majority of scholars, Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Now the reason they're called Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is because the Sunnah is a point of dissension amongst these early people, and there was a lot of debates about what exactly the Sunnah was and defending the Sunnah. Now we have a modern phenomenon called the Quraniyun, people that don't believe in Hadith, and these people, first of all, you can't have the Quran without an understanding of the Hadith, because the Quran is relayed by the same men that relate the Hadith. The people in the chains of Quran are the same people in the chains of Hadith. So if you're going to deny the Hadith, you're essentially denying the Quran as well. It's absolutely absurd. Which is why our scholars said that if you deny all of the Hadith, it's basically you're out of Islam. I mean, that does put you beyond the pale. If you deny a Hadith in al-Bukhari that you're a physician and you think it's unscientific, nobody should call that person a disbeliever. But if the Prophet said it, then you might be denying something that he said, which is dangerous. If you have a trouble with a hadith, I think the best approach would just be, if he said it, I believe it. You know, I mean, I would not categorically state, no, he didn't say that, I don't believe he said that. There are certain hadiths that are problematic, that's undeniable. And they certainly don't express the spirit of the Prophet ﷺ. The probability, many of the enemies of Islam were fabricating hadiths, we know that. So the possibility of some hadiths getting in there, it's certainly there. We know the mawdu'at are many hadiths were fabricated. But we had great scholars that protected the hadith tradition, and that's why it's better not to do that. There are certain hadiths that are certainly not creedal. There are hadiths about women in the prophetic tradition that are often abused or misunderstood or used egregiously, and the context of them, the Prophet ﷺ, the famous hadith where he told the women, you know, I saw the majority of people in the fire were women. He was trying to get them to give charity. رأيت أكثر أهل النار النساء. Well, first of all, it's important to remember there's another hadith that says اطلعت على الجنة ووجدت أكثر أهلها النساء. I saw paradise and the majority of its inhabitants were women. So you have to be very careful with these hadiths. The Prophet was encouraging them to give. Now, Ajluni says women have sins of the tongue, and one of the main reasons for the fire is the tongue. And so it doesn't mean men don't have sins of the tongue, but a lot of women, I mean, we know now in social sciences that women speak more than men on average. Actually, I mean, we know this. This is social science. So, it's been studied with control mechanisms and things like that. So the Prophet ﷺ said that, but Ajluni says women's sins are often less heinous than men. I mean, men do the real big things: the murders, the rapes, the wars, the pillaging, all that stuff. That's men's business. The women have. So he said that the women will have initially, because these women are going to get purification, but he said eventually the majority will be in the paradise. Because the people that stay in the hell forever, they're going to be more men because their sins are graver. So people, you have to be very careful with these prophetic traditions and making judgments about people. Even the naqs that's mentioned about women, naqs is an impediment. So, the idea, there are many women that are far brighter than most men. So this idea, women are, they're not as intelligent as we are. Well, Aisha would run rings around all of us put together. So this kind of arrogance that men read these hadiths and, suddenly it's like, yeah. I mean, it's ridiculous. So, I mean, Selma Yaqubi, I mean, she's out-debate most of the people here, wouldn't you say? Huh? Selma? Yeah, Yaqub. So the jama'ah is the majority. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to be with the majority. He said, "Man shadda shadda fin nar." If you deviate into the fire. He said that shaitan is like a dhi'bu fil ghanam, wa ya'khudh al-qasiya. It takes the one that moves away from the flock. So the jama'ah is very important. Yadullah ma'al jama'ah. The ijma' is a hujjah in Islam. وَمَنْ يُشَاقِقَ الرَّسُولِ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ الْهُدَى وَيَتَّبِعْ غَيْرَ سَبِيلِ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. And he follows the way of other than the believers. So the way of the believers is also goes with the Prophet. It's the jama'ah. There are things that it's in Christianity they call the magisterium. In the Catholic tradition, you have the Bible and then you have the magisterium, which is the knowledge that comes from that collective wisdom of bishops or the cardinals. We have an understanding that's similar to that in that you have the ulama that have an ijma' about things. So for instance, grammar is part of our deen. You can't say grammar is not part, it's not in the Quran, brother, it's not in the hadith. No, but you can't understand the Quran and the hadith without grammar. So the jama'ah is what determines what is essential from the religion. And not all of this is directly in the book and the sunnah, but some of it is derived from it. لَعَلِمَهُ الَّذِينَ يَسْتَنبِطُونَ مِنْهُ. They will know it, those who are able to derive from it these understandings. So it's very important. Istinbat is part of our deen. And people that have that ability are the scholars. And that's the Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, are the people of the prophetic way and the Jama'ah of this majority of these scholars. And then he says, in accordance with the understanding of the Muslim jurists such as Imam Abu Hanifa, and Nu'man ibn Thabit al-Kufi, there's a nice biography of him. People that don't know his biography should read it. And then Abu Yusuf, Yaqub bin Ibrahim al-Ansari, this was one of his great students. And then Muhammad al-Hasan al-Shaybani, another one of his great students. It includes their beliefs about the theological foundations of the religion upon which they base their worship of the Lord of the worlds, Rabbul Alameen. Rabb in the Arabic language has three primary meanings. One of them, the Rabb is the muslih li-shay. It's the one that rectifies. Yarubbu shay'an or yurabbibu tarbiban. So somebody that rectifies something. It's also al-maliku li-shay, the one that possesses something, like Rabbul Bayt, the owner of the house, Rabbat al-Manzil, the lord of the house, the mistress of the house. And then you have a Sayyidu. It also means the Sayyid, the one that you go to for help and need. Ya Rab, calling on that one. Arbab, it's used for Allah and it's also used for humans. So humans take that the Arbab in this world, like people that are in high positions, things like that. So, and then Al-Alameen can mean two different things. One of the meanings of Alameen is that it means all of the world, the awalim. But generally, that jama' in the Arabic language is it's a plural that's used for the uqala. It's for the things that have aqal. And that's why Ibn Abbas considered it to mean Rabb al-Ins wal-Jinn. Those are the alameen. And in riwayat Warsh, inna fi dhalika la'ayatin lil-alameen, he says alameen, Hafs says alimeen. So it uses both, the knowers and the alameen. Alam is ism ala, like khatam is what you seal something with. Alam is a instrumentative substantive in Arabic. It's the way you articulate a tool. So the fa'al, that wazn in Arabic is for tools, for using something to do. So khatam is what you seal something with. Alam is what you know something by. So the world is alam because it's what you know Allah by. The world is how you get ilm of your Lord, the alim. So the alam is to get ilm of the alim. I mean, that's how Allah, the world is the vehicle by which we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So He's Rabb al-Alameen, the Lord of all the worlds. And then he says about Abu Hanifa and the two Imams that they believe this, saying that, and he begins, Inna Allah wahidun la sharika lah, that Allah is one, without partner. Wahidun la sharika lah. In the Arabic language, one is not a number. One is not a number. Arabs have very interesting things about numbers. In Arabic, when you go, wahidun, ithnan, thalatha, arba'a, khamsa, sitta, sab'a, when you go from 7 to 8, you have to use a wow. You can't just go directly. So you say, wa thamaniya. It's an octave. That's their language. So you say, if you're counting in Arabic, you're supposed to say between 7 and 8, wa. You're supposed to separate it with a wow. Because there's a change when you go from 7 to 8. And it's also, anyway, that's a whole other. I don't want to go down that route. Then this is where you go mad with numerology and things. But the wahid is not a number. It's the basis of number. Everything in the world indicates one. I mean, one of the most interesting things, when I was studying chemistry at the university, I was stunned by the fact that hydrogen is the basis of the cosmos. Everything, hydrogen is the most prevalent element in the cosmos. And the fact that the atomic number of hydrogen was 1, just for me as a Muslim, I said, subhanallah. That Allah made the basis of His cosmos an element whose atomic number is 1. That's what one of the poets said, أَلَا كُلُّ شَيْءٍ لَهُ آيَةٌ تَدُلُّ عَلَى أَنَّهُ وَاحِدٌ. In existence, everything is a sign indicating His oneness. So, that He is one, Allah, which really means unique, because unique can't have anything added to it. So one here is unique. Allah is wahidun, unique. And that's why everything, mysteriously, is a multiple of 1. In mathematics, everything is a multiple of 1. That's just a mathematical fact. If you multiply anything by 1, it's the same number. So everything is from 1. 1 is the source of everything. So Allah is one without partner. Nothing is like Him. لا شيء مثله. This is from the verse in the Quran, ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. There is nothing like unto Allah. There's nothing like God. The wow there is not an atf, it's isti'naf. In Arabic you have different types of wow. The wow there is not a conjunctive wow. It's actually a wow that indicates like a period. So what it's really saying is there is nothing like God, like unto Allah, yet. Not and. So if you look at most of the translations out there, they always translate it, and He is the all-seeing, the all-hearing. That's not what it says. If you read in the commentaries, they say that wow is yasta'nifu. It's to stop. There is nothing like God, yet He sees and He hears. In other words, seeing and hearing, how do we know what seeing and hearing is? If we say Allah is the all-hearing, how do we know what that means? How do we know? How do we know what that means? If we say Allah is all-hearing, how do I know what all-hearing means? How do I know? I'm asking. How do we know? How do you know what hearing is? Because we hear, right? If I couldn't hear, if I'm a deaf person, I can't understand what hearing is. Could I? I mean, I can maybe get an idea of it. You'd have to ask somebody who was deaf, but if you were deaf from birth, you really wouldn't know what it is. You might get some concept of it, but you can't. Well, that's like us with Allah. When our hearing is finite, Allah's hearing is infinite. It needs no ear. Allah has no ear. Allah has no 8th cranial nerve. And that's the only way we can hear is we have an 8th cranial nerve. You lose that nerve, you can't hear anymore. So Allah is using an analogy of our hearing to understand something about His nature. وَفِي أَنفُسِكُمْ أَفَلَا تُبْصِرُونَ. In your own selves, don't you see? Allah has put in us these attributes. These are tajalliyat. Allah tajalla bi-sifatihi. He's revealing Himself through us. And that's why the famous statement, it's recorded as a hadith, it's probably a statement of Imam Ali, Man arafa nafsu faqad arafa rabbuhu. If you know yourself, you know your Lord. Because Allah has put these analogies in you. He put in you hearing. He put in you sight. He put in you understanding. He put in you will and volition. He put in you knowledge. He put in you all these abilities. And then He said, reflect. Think about these things. So Allah is al-mutakallim. How do we know? Kallam Allahu Musa taklima. How do we know that Allah spoke to Moses? How do we know what that means? It's because we can speak. Speaking is meaning. So the words are not the point of speech. What's the point of speech? If words were the point of speech, I could just say table, up, yesterday, vehicle. It doesn't mean anything. Why? Because I didn't put them in order. Each one of those things might mean something, but then I could reduce it down to sounds. Ba, fa, seen. Now what's he talking about? At least before, tree. Oh, okay, I can think of a tree. But then I say vehicle. What's vehicle got to do with the tree? But when I say the vehicle hit the tree, now meaning has come together. Although we believe there's meaning all the way down to the level of the phonemes. Most of these linguists don't believe that phonemes have meaning. We believe that even the phonemes have meaning. Because moaning is a meaning. We believe that alif, lam, mim are meanings. We don't say they have no meaning. That means there's meaningless things in the Quran. So when Allah says alif, lam, mim, when Allah says hamim, when Allah says yasin, ain, sin, qaf, these are meanings, but we don't know what they mean. Allahu a'lam. And it's amazing that He began His book with something meaningful, but He has prevented us from knowing what it means. It's something extraordinary about the Quran, to begin the book with something that we don't have access to, just to let us know. You don't know very much. So if you don't come to this book saying Allahu a'lam and humble, you're not going to get anything out of it. Nothing. سأصرف عن آياتي الذين يتكبرون في الأرض. I will divert my signs from those who are arrogant. You won't have access to the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So things will happen, they won't have any meaning for you. But once you enter into the world of meaning, everything becomes meaningful. Events are meaningful. The reason that things are happening, they're meaningful. The reason that you're up or down, the reason that you're in an accident, the reason that you're sick, the reason that you've lost all your money, the reason that you just lost a job, all these things become meaningful, and it's up to you to interpret them. Because that's the nature of meaning. You're decoders of meaning. You were created to decode the world. That's what you're here for, to be people that not only have meaning and purpose, but discern meaning and purpose in the world. That's why we're here. And that's really what this is about. So there's nothing like him, but yet you can't know him without having some type of immanence, without some type of likeness. But don't think that likeness is his reality. Don't think your hearing has anything to do with God's hearing. Don't think your seeing has anything to do with God's seeing. Don't think your speech has anything to do with God's speech, or your will has anything to do with God's will. But you can't have any approximation of what those things mean concerning God without having knowledge of their analogies in the world. That's the point. But لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٌ. Nothing is like God. Nothing. And yet he hears and he sees. So don't think that hearing and seeing is what you understand to be hearing and seeing, but I'm giving you an approximation to help you understand. That's why Ibn Abbas said, لَيْسَ فِي الْجَنَّةِ مِنَ الدُّنْيَا إِلَّا الْأَسْمَاءِ. There's nothing in the world, in paradise, of the world except names. That's Ibn Abbas said that. Nothing in paradise. Everything that in paradise has nothing to do with the world except names. That's why somebody said, right after 9/11, they asked me about the Hur al-Ain. Somebody on a radio station, I was doing a radio station. And they said to me, what's the Hur al-Ain? And I said, well, it's used in the Quran, it's metonymy, something. And he said, you mean an allegory? And I said, yeah. And partly because of a radio station, what are you going to do? Start giving people lessons in rhetoric? And these are rhetorical terms. But people go, oh, he denied Hur al-Ain and this and that. Somebody went to my teacher in Saudi Arabia, Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya, and said, he said the Hur al-Ain was kinaya, and Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya said, هذا مذهب Ibn Abbas. That's the opinion of Ibn Abbas. People, you have to be careful about what you think is reality. Because مَا أُوتِيتُم مِنَ الْعِلْمِ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. We've only been given a little knowledge. We don't know very much. But my point of that is it troubles me deeply that these people think that Muslims are fighting to go to heaven so they can sleep with women. They can do that in the world. They don't need to leave the world to do that. I mean, that's not why Muslims... That's not why we do things. That's not what motivates Muslims. Muslims are motivated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet said, anybody that is struggling, yujahiduna, for other than to make Allah's word the highest, he's not a mujahid. It has nothing to do with jihad. That was my point. It troubles me that people think that's our religion. It's debased down to this. And then also, what about the women? There's nothing in the Quran. The women and the men, their rewards, they get the rewards, so that's the point. So it's there's nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and there's nothing like paradise. ما لا عين رأت ولا أذن سمعت ولا خطر على قلب بشر. And then somebody, in that same interview, I said the definitive verse. People say, oh, that's not in the Quran. No, but the Prophet ﷺ said, وَلَهُمْ فِيهَا مَا تَشْتَهِي أَنفُسُهُم. They have in it what their souls desire. And then he said in the Sahih Hadith, أَوْ قُولُوا إِن شِئْتُمْ فِيهَا مَا لَا عَيْنٌ رَأَتْ وَلَا أُذْنٌ سَمِعَتْ وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ. Or say, if you like, instead of that verse, in paradise is like no eye has seen, no ear has heard, or never occurred to the human heart. That was permission for the Prophet to use that to interpret that verse, and that was my point. But so it's important to know these things. Everything that you can think of, Allah is other than that. Everything you can imagine, paradise is other than that. And this dunya, in relation to the next world, is like a dream. When you die, suddenly you're going to wake up and it'll all be real. This dunya is nothing compared to the next world. Nothing. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ was shown much of the unseen realm. When he went on the Isra, Allah opened up in the Mi'raj, He opened up to him things, untold things. He went through hell, he saw people suffering in hell. He saw paradise. Really, he saw amazing things. But what did Allah say about him? مَا زَاغَ الْبَصَرُ وَمَا طَغَى. His eye didn't deviate. He wasn't interested in that stuff. He was focused on his Lord. That's where the Prophet was. He was focused on his Lord. He wasn't focused on all that. I mean, most people, they would be lost if they had those unveilings. Even if you had unveilings today and go out on the street, you'll see all the demons talking to people. You'll see all... People have unveiling, they'll go mad. But the Prophet was shown all these things, and his focus was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He saw Jibreel on the whole horizon. How could you imagine that? He saw the angel fill up the entire horizon. I mean, just imagine going outside and seeing a heavenly being that fills up the entire horizon. That was an unveiling to the Prophet ﷺ. But he wasn't, he was completely focused. La shay'a mithlu, nothing like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So don't get caught up in all of this diversity. You want me to do the question? This was just an introduction, and but really that's enough for just to know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But I hope that you study. There's teachers here that are very qualified to teach, and I hope somebody does that. And I really hope that people, there was a time in the Muslim community, they said that when Abu Dawood was in Baghdad, when he came there were 70,000 ink pots in the masjid. 70,000. I mean, we used to have an ummah of learning and scholarship, and so it's very important to revive that in our deen. But again, our deen is not just about books and not just about learning. It's about action also. So you need both. You need to have an understanding, ibadah, but you also need to have reaching out to the community, helping people, supporting people, help each other, support the weak in the community. You'll be given victory by helping your weak people. That's a promise. God gives help from this people based on their help for the poor people. So help the weak and the needy in this community. Did you do these? Bismillah. So these are some of the questions. Okay, so I'll sign the sisters' books first. They requested because some of them have children that they wanted. How can you introduce this subject to children? Before 7, you have to be very careful with children in teaching. Children are very spiritual by nature. The unseen world is very accessible to children. Before 7, children have experiences that are very spiritual. And in fact, Chilton Pierce wrote a book about teenagers saying that really one of the most receptive periods spiritually for young people is when they're in their teens. And a lot of the Prophet ﷺ, his closest followers were very young. Really, many of them were very young men and women. So they have a lot of access. I would introduce these I'll give you an example. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq's grandmother, Umar Banin, who raised him, he was an orphan. She used to hide food in the house. I mean, I'm not suggesting you do this, but just to show you something that had an impact on him. And when he would come home from school, he would be hungry. And she would say, let's make a dua. There's no food in the house, but let's make a dua and ask Allah to provide us. And then they would pray really earnestly, and he said he would be praying really earnestly, and then when they finished, he would say, Subhanallah, maybe Allah's brought us something let's look around the house. And they would go looking around, and then he would find it. He would say, SubhanAllah, like his dua was answered. And he said, I realized when I got older that she was teaching me tawakkul. So he understood the lesson of that it was her trying to teach him about tawakkul. And so there are many things that you can do with children. What I try to do is remind them of just great gratitude, gratefulness. Food is such a blessing. To remind them of, when I eat with my children, I just remind them, like if we're eating strawberry, I just look at the redness. Allah made that red just for us so we could enjoy it. And look at the taste, and just really trying to make them feel the blessing of it. It's really important to do that. And you should do it for yourself as well, because we just take so much for granted. It's just such a gift to eat. I lived in West Africa where the food that we ate at times was not what dogs eat in the West, and really difficult food. And I remember going to Nouakchott, and just bread without anything on it, just bread, was such an incredible treat. I mean, just bread, nothing on it, just bread. Now you have butter and marmalade, and and on. We have so many blessings. So gratitude, instilling gratitude in your children, and really making them aware of the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala constantly. وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. If you begin to enumerate the blessings of God, you'll never come to an end. They did a study in University of Davis, where they took depressed people, two groups, a control group, another group, and one group, they had them think of things, why they were depressed, and write it down every morning. And then the other group, they had them think of blessings, to write down things that they should be grateful for. What they found is the people that began to enumerate their blessings, they started getting out of their depression, literally feeling better, because they started their day by thinking of things that they had to be grateful for. Because you always have things to be grateful for. So and then also just teaching them some basic things about Allah. Anything you think about Allah is other than that. And teaching them love of the Prophet ﷺ is extremely important. How do you view the works of modern academies such as Cook, Crone? Well, I think the whole Haggarite school is absolutely absurd. I don't give it any credence, and they're starting to back down anyway. I mean, even Crone. Patricia Crone she's a serious scholar in Islamic political theory and things. I mean, I'm not going to undermine her personal work, but her ideas about the Quran and things, I can't take them seriously at all. Somebody who's studied within the tradition and knows the tradition, and almost all Orientalists of any weight have rejected their theories. So I mean, they're not sound theories. The idea, they found qiblas in Medina, in Egypt and Iraq from the 1st century facing Jerusalem. So they came up with this theory that, the Qibla was initially Jerusalem, and it was Abdul Malik bin Marwan that changed it to Mecca. Well, anybody that knows the early debates about the Qibla, many of the early scholars thought that you should follow the wall of the Kaaba. So if you were in Iraq, you would follow that Iraqi wall, and you'd end up facing Jerusalem, because they had an idea that the walls extended out on the earth. That's why in Morocco, if you go to Spain, has anybody been to the mosque in Cordoba? That mosque faces due south. So what? Did the Muslims were first worshiping towards Morocco, and then somebody changed it to Mecca? That had to do with an early debate. They didn't believe in directions like now most people follow the Shafi'i madhab, which is to try to find the exact direction of Mecca. Historically, the Maliki madhab was, if you were in the east, you face west. If you're in the west, you face east. If you're in the north, you face south. You just followed a basic direction, and you didn't try to get specific about it. So they found these masjids that made perfect sense to me, because I studied that early debate. And they said, they were facing Jerusalem. So it must have been later that they changed it. People, they have too much to do. too little to do, so they just start thinking things up. And then also, you want to be clever and make some new theory. That's part of the academia. You know, to just agree with the predecessors, you know, that doesn't get you anywhere. Become controversial, and then people buy your books. And you mentioned that non-Muslims should study Islam before coming to judgment about religion itself. Should not all Muslims then study other religions as well? Well, I mean, one of the amazing things about the Quran is it's a comparative religion book. And the Quran talks about other religions. It tells you the essential beliefs of the Jews. It tells you the essential beliefs of the Christians. And it tells you the essential beliefs of idolaters. So, I mean, the Quran is a comparative. You should have a basic idea of comparative religion. I mean, I think it's good for people who are working in dawah and things like that. They should definitely study other religions. I mean, I did my university degree in comparative religion, and you know, if you haven't studied Islam seriously, I would study that first. If you've studied that, then you can study other things. But I think it's ridiculous to read the Bible if you don't know the Quran. One of the things that really troubles me about our community, I was mentioning this earlier today, is that a lot of Muslims don't know the themes of Quran. Like I learned when I was Christian, I learned the basic themes of the Bible. I knew what, like Genesis, I know what that book is basically about, Exodus, I know the basic themes of those books. Most Muslims don't know the themes of Baqarah. They don't know the themes of Ali Imran. They don't know what the Quran is about because they haven't studied it as a book. They just read it devotionally. And so I think it's very important to study the Quran thematically. A good number of us are students, undergraduate, postgraduate. We encounter non-Muslims on a daily basis. On the basis of your lecture today, can you give us some tips to invite non-Muslims to Islam? I think part of what we have to do in many ways is educate people about Islam. I think proselytizing, historically Muslims were very loose about proselytizing. They were more interested in just trying to be good Muslims and let their actions speak louder than their words. I think we as a community need to focus much more on our community in helping elevate our community, helping our community be better at being Muslims. That doesn't mean that some of us should not be involved in reaching out to these greater communities. If you have people that you're spending time with that aren't Muslim and they see your behavior. I mean, I was just with a girl yesterday, and I'll tell you, it's very important to think about this. She's from a Hindu family. She's been interested in Islam for 3 years. Very sweet young lady. I could tell she really wanted to become a Muslim. And she had Muslim friends. She's been fasting Ramadan for 3 years. But what was really holding her back was her family. She said it would devastate her family, and she was just so worried about the repercussions. You have to appreciate how difficult it is to convert to another religion. It's very difficult. And there's a lot of people there that we just need to be welcoming to them and just help them do that. But I think there's a lot of people out there that if they knew about Islam, they would want to become Muslim, really. And then some of them will have difficulties, but at least they'll have a good opinion of the religion. The best way to get rid of waswasa and guilty conscience, horrific memories of the past. The dhikr of Allah, especially La ilaha illallah, is one of the most powerful things for helping the heart. Prayer on the Prophet ﷺ is also very powerful. Recitation of Quran. But dhikr of Allah is what polishes the heart. The Prophet said, Kullu shayin yasla wa inal qalba yasla. Everything corrodes. Everything oxidizes. Even the human heart corrodes. And he said, and the polishing of the heart is dhikrullah. Saqadatuhu dhikrullah. The polishing of the heart is dhikrullah. And so that's the best advice. In terms of trauma, there's also some trauma therapies that people can do to help, because trauma is real and people do have traumatic experiences. Somebody's been raped before, it's a very traumatic experience, and sometimes people need help to get through those things. So I wouldn't make light of that at all. What is the best way for Muslims to get married in the West, especially if you're new to the Muslim community and complete segregation? I think, historically, marriages were, there used to be matchmakers and people that knew somebody, and I mean, that's often how it was done in families. They did. Now people use computers to do things like that, but they actually used to have human beings that were very good at that. And I know just the right person for you. Those tended to be older women that were moving in and out of that could move in and out of the groups. In a lot of Muslim cultures, there is complete segregation. In some Muslim cultures, it's less so. I studied in Mauritania, where the segregation is not like it is in the Middle East, for instance. It's quite different. Khalwa is what is prohibited. I think you need to develop ways that Muslim men and women can meet in a halal environment, where it's not going anything haram come out of it, where they can get to know each other. Because I think a lot of people jump into marriages too quick, and you end up with high divorce rates, which is starting to happen in our community. It's important to know the person that you're getting into. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged that people should know them, but it should be done within the confines and constraints of our tradition of the Sharia. The concept of Tawheed al-Hakimiyyah and use of making takfir on the rulers of Muslim countries. Tawheed al-Hakimiyyah is a new concept. You don't find that in the early books of creed. The idea of وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. If you don't rule by the rulings of God, you are a kafir. Ibn Abbas said, كُفْرٌ لَا يُخْرِجُهُ عَنِ الْمِلَّةِ. It's a type of kufr that doesn't excommunicate you from the religion. Allah says, غُضُّوا أَبْصَارَكُمْ. Lower your gaze. If you're not lowering your gaze, you're not ruling by that rule of Allah. Does that make you a kafir? I mean, there are a lot of things people don't practice that are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so the political leaders that aren't implementing Islam or Islamic laws, we don't call them kuffar. I mean, the only time they become kafirs is if they reject the law, if they say, I don't believe in those laws. Then that's different. But if they believe in them, but they don't practice them, you can't call them kafir. And we don't believe in making takfir of our rulers. And even in the Aqidah of Imam Tahawiyyah, وَلَا نَخْرُجُ عَلَى وُلَاةِ أُمُورِنَا وَإِنْ جَارُوا عَلَيْنَا. We don't go against our rulers even if they oppress us. And what greater dereliction of religious duty than the one who oppresses another person? They're definitely not ruling by what God has told them to do. So that's the position. Here in this country, we're under a social contract that's binding upon us, and this is the Islamic tradition. I mean, our Sharia says if you're living in a Christian land or a secular, wherever you're living, if you've entered into that land with a visa or what they called idhn or jawaz, then you have to obey them. And I have a book written in the 4th century by Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani, one of the great Maliki scholars. They call him Malik al-Saghir, the little Malik. He wrote a book called Nawadir wa Ziyadat. In that book, he mentions that Ibn Abd al-Hakam, one of the great Maliki scholars, was asked, what do you say about a people who go get permission to enter into the land of the Christians for commerce? Are they obliged to obey the rules of that land? And he said, indeed they are. And then they asked him, what about if the people break their covenant with them, and are treacherous to them, and do something illegal to them? And he said, if it was from the government, then there's no contract anymore between them. But if it was from the ignorant amongst them, then they're still bound by the law of the land. In other words, if you're living and somebody mugs you, you can't use that as an excuse to go rob a bank. But if the government breaks their covenant with you, seizes your bank account, and does something like that, then you're no longer bound by that. You can try to escape from the prison or something if you've been unjustly held. If you did something wrong, broke the law, and went to jail for it, that's another matter. But if it's unjust, then you're within your rights to break that social contract. But his point was, and it's very important, is that we believe in social contracts, and that's why fiqh is so important. You know, you have a group of people here that say you're not bound by the laws of the land. Where did they get that from? They're misquoting verses of Quran. أَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ. You believe in some parts of the book and you reject other parts of the book. The Quran is a holistic book. You can't take verses that you like, cherry pick them, and say, oh, well, the Quran says we don't have to follow the laws of the kuffar. And then another one, it says that don't break your covenant. أَدُّ الْأَمَانَاتِ إِلَى أَهْلِهَا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fulfill your oaths, fulfill your word. The Prophet fulfilled his word with people. When he had treaties with the non-Muslims, he never broke those treaties unless they broke them. The Prophet never broke his treaties, ever. Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, when he conquered Jerusalem, he didn't invade Akka. Why? Because he had a treaty with them. The treaty with the people of Jerusalem was over. The treaty with the people of Akka, even though he had an army, he could have defeated that city, and it was a Muslim city. Because that treaty was still standing, he didn't invade them. Because he was a man of his word. That's Islam. So you can't have it both ways. This idea that people aren't bound by the law here. We're bound by the law. And that's not stoogism. That's not, that's our deen. That's what I was taught. And these people, they're bringing some new, innovative thing. Or it's just the old Khawarij, the people of the past. And they had their verses and their hadiths. And you can use the Quran to justify anything that you want if you're clever enough. Really. I mean, that's the nature of words. What is the difference between having correct Aqidah with certainty and not believing you're from the safe sect? No, I'm not saying don't believe. We should hope. But don't make that claim. I'm definitely from the safe sect. I mean, that's not our religion. That's other religions do that. We don't have that. Abu Bakr said, if I had one foot in paradise and one foot out, I still wouldn't feel safe. And that's Iman. But you trust in Allah. We believe that Allah is generous and that He promised, so you should trust in Allah. But don't delude yourself. You mentioned that Imam Shafi changed his legal positions when in a different milieu. We in the West encounter a situation perhaps inconceivable to earlier peoples. Does this necessitate new fiqh? How do we facilitate this? I mean, there's definitely situations like that example of a woman who becomes Muslim and she's married to a non-Muslim man. Ibn Taymiyyah said for people living in non-Muslim lands that was acceptable if he wasn't trying to force her out of the religion. So that's a type of fiqh that's useful, and he took that opinion from some of the Sahaba. So it is a valid opinion within our tradition. So there are things that we need to do here that are going to necessitate flexibility for people. There's no doubt about that. But we don't want to dilute our tradition until there's nothing left. I mean, it's very dangerous. So it's a slippery slope. The madhabs are very important, and the integrity of the madhabs are important, but there can't be this slavish adherence to rigid rules to the point where you're going to drive people out of Islam. But we need fuqaha. We need people like Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayya. I mean, we need those types of intellects coming into Islam, seriously studying the religion. He's doing a seminar for us this summer on usul specifically to our conditions in the West. He's just written a book that he wrote for Western scholars of Islam here, called Sana'at al-Fatwa, which is the craft of fatwa. And he's definitely of that opinion that we need to be able to navigate these waters but with tools and with the constraints of our methodologies. If God is completely independent, then why did He create the universe, humanity in the first place? I mean, that's a good question. It's not an insignificant question. The Muslim scholars, what's called the illa gha'iyah, which is it's a type of cause for which you do something. In logic, there's an idea that when you make something, there's a purpose. Like there's a reason why the microphone was made, and we don't believe that Allah Subhanahu wa Taala creates out of any need or reason, but Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is Khaliq. It's one of His attributes. And had we gotten into this text a little further, He says very clearly that له ليس منذ خلق الخلق استفاد اسم الخالق ولا بإحداث البرية استفاد اسم الباري. That he says it is not after creating the universe that He merits the name Creator, that He was Creator without a creation, nor through originating His creatures that He merits the name Originator. And this is Sifat al-Takwin. This is debate between some of these theologians, but the point here is that what he's saying is that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is al-Khaliq. It's one of His natures, and so everything that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala does is due to His essential and inherent nature, and part of His nature is to create. So He created, and we're His creation. We're the makhluq. The Muslims traditionally had they attributed to a hadith, but it actually comes out of the Jewish tradition. And the hadith is related as كنت كنزا مخفيا فأردت أن أعرف فخرقت الخرق حتى أن أعرف. I was a hidden treasure that desired to be known, so I created my creation. In other words, to know me. ما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون. I only created jinn and humans in order that I am adored, يعبدون, Ibn Abbas said, ليعرفون, in order to be known. So ma'rifah is something that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has created us to know Him, and it's to have uns. That's why insan is from uns, which means intimate, that we were created to be intimate with our Lord. One of the Persian poets said, insan means pupil of the eye, and what he said was, and this is a metaphor, so don't take it as anything other than a metaphor. He said that the human being is like the reflected pupil. In other words, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala created creation to reflect His attributes. And the human is the attribute that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has created to perceive His attributes. So we're the creature that's cognizant of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And it's a great gift, but Allah did not need to create it, has no need of us. It's from His fadl. You know, when if you look at a generous person who just lavishes gifts on you, there's people that lavish gifts on you. Why? Because they want something from you, right? But then there's generous people that just lavish gifts because they're generous. They have no need. They don't even want your praise. It's just their nature. That's the fadl of Allah. And the creation is from the fadl of Allah. It's from His bounty. Dhul fadli. He is the one who possesses bounty. And so this is from His bounty. Consciousness is from the bounty of Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. So it's just a gift from Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. And people say, well, why did God create creation? You know, why didn't He create it before or after? Why? Time is a creation of Allah. Now we're starting to understand that. The Muslims knew that early on. Time is seen as a created thing now. That time began with the Big Bang, according to material sciences. So you don't ask about before and after with God. In fact, in Catholic tradition they call God Nukstan. In the Islamic tradition, we have a very similar concept in which Imam al-Jurjani, one of the great scholars of Islam, said, when Allah said, "La tusub ad-dahr fa innani ana dahr," don't curse time because I'm time. He said what he meant is that Allah is al-an ad-da'im, the eternal now. There's no past or present for God. God is the eternal now. And for the last few years of my life, I have experienced some periods of extreme serious doubt. I think my focus on them made it worse, and it was made difficult because it came after a period of great spiritual high. However, I still sometimes feel very shaky and empty, heavy, and I'm sure that you will be aware of the great grief that can be experienced through such a state. Should I aim to study? What if I persist in instability? I mean, I think there are a lot of people out there that are struggling. This is a very difficult time for faith, by the way. I mean, I think people should be aware of that. There's a lot. The Prophet ﷺ said towards the latter days, يُصْبِحُ الْحَلِيمُ حَيْرَانًا, that even sagacious people will become confused. He also said, يُصْبِحُ الْمُؤْمِنُ كَافِرًا يُصْبِحُ الْمَرْءُ مُؤْمِنًا وَيُمْسِي كَافِرًا ويمسي كافرا يصبح المرء مؤمنا ويمسي كافرا, that a man will wake up a believer and go to sleep a kafir. So salb al-iman, you have to protect your faith. You don't want to have your faith taken from you. The way that you protect your faith is through, one, the shukr for it, because it's a great blessing to have belief. وَدَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا لَوْ آمَنُوا. There's amongst them, there's people that wish they could believe. Amongst the people who disbelieve, they wish they could believe. And the Quran says they actually want to believe. So belief is a great gift, because people without belief, it's not a good state to be in. And you can have some kind of meaning in your life. People that don't believe in God, it's not that their lives aren't meaningful, but their meanings are ultimately, there's no ultimate meaning to their life. There's, raising children, having a wife, having a husband, those type of things can be meaningful in and of themselves. But any ultimate purpose, without some belief in the sacred, there isn't. And we don't believe, do people think they're just meaningless? And that's what Allah says. Does man think he's just meaningless? That all this energy and effort of creation, not from Allah, but from creation itself, like your mother, you're in the womb of your mother for 9 months. You start out as a single cell, and now there's billions of cells in your body. It's just amazing. There's more genetic material in one of your cells than all the information in the Library of London, the Great Library of London. I mean, an immense amount of information has gone in to you and your creation and nurturing it. You've been here for all this time. So it's just important to recognize that faith is a great blessing. In terms of doubts and things like that, I think, everybody will experience some level of doubt. It's just part of being. Imam al-Ghazali went through an intense period of skepticism. I mean, one could argue, if you read Munqidh min al-Dalal, he basically lost his faith. I mean, he never really says that, but if you read the text, I've read that text enough times to know that he was in a complete state of skepticism. And he really was unsure of himself. He went into a really existential crisis. But in the end, what he realized is that that's why he realized it's not book knowledge. It's like you need book knowledge, but it's not book knowledge. And he set out on a path, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him great opening. So I think I would recommend to you, one, to get to know the Prophet ﷺ better, to read his seerah, to have a stronger relationship with the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, a real relation of love. where you love the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, you have to love the Prophet ﷺ. And just I want to be with the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet said, "Al-mar'u ma'a man ahab," that a man is with the one he loves. I want to be with the Prophet ﷺ. I mean, I want to sit in his company. I want to see his smile. I want to be in his company. So just how we can increase love of the Prophet ﷺ in our hearts. Because the Prophet is the great gift that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave this ummah. He gave revelation to previous ummahs. They had the Torah, Fihi Hudan wa Nur. There's guidance and light in it. He gave the Injil to the Christians. I mean, other revelations have come. The Quran's a great revelation, but so is the Torah, so is the Injil. They're great. But the Prophet ﷺ, what a gift. So I really think that will help people. The Prophet ﷺ had doubts about himself. We know that when the revelation began, he was perplexed about what it meant. He didn't know. And Khadija had the presence of mind to take him to Waraqa ibn Nawfal and things like that. That's why the Prophet is a believer. We forget that. Amana ar-Rasul bima unzila ilayhi. The Prophet believes in what was revealed to him. He had to believe in it too. He could have denied it and said, no, it's jinn and I have doubts and this and that. He had to believe in it too. But initially he was very worried. And in Catholic tradition, they have what they call the law of discernment. I mean, people are wondering why I'm quoting from the Catholics so much today. There's a lot of good things in their traditions that I like. But they have one thing which is called the law of discernment. And that is that in their tradition, that a spiritual state is true if the initial response to it is contraction and doubt. And it's not true if the initial response to it is expansion. That's from the devil. And so by their law, the Prophet ﷺ, what happened to him perfectly fits with that law of discernment. What he initially had was contraction. Because somebody who's really pure, they're going to think I'm unworthy. See, look at Aisha radiallahu anha. When the revelation came to Aisha, they accused her of adultery. Can you imagine that? I mean, you're the wife of the Prophet ﷺ in a whole society where everybody's talking about. She got so sick. She couldn't eat. She withered away, and she was so sick, and she still wouldn't let anybody speak ill of, Miss Tahan. What an amazing woman! But when the revelation came, she said, "Kuntu ahqiru nafsi." I had such a low opinion of myself that I never thought Allah would reveal something about me specifically. She thought that the Prophet would tell them that it wasn't true, but she never thought she would be mentioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What an amazing woman, Aisha. So that's a real believer. It's not the one that, of course me, why not me? I'm the perfect choice. It's like, this is too big for me. And that's the problem. He was such a humble human being. So that, why would Allah misguide by the Quran when it was revealed as a book of guidance? Huda lil muttaqeen. It's guidance for people of taqwa, not guidance for everybody. It's guidance for people of taqwa. And people of taqwa are people of piety, people of humility. It's not guidance for people of arrogance. So Allah says that He only leads astray the zalimeen, oppressive people. فَلَمَّا زَاغُوا أَزَاغَ اللَّهُ قُلُوبَهُمْ. When they deviated, Allah caused their hearts to deviate. فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٍ فَزَادَهُمْ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا. In their hearts is a disease, so they're increased in their disease. Allah doesn't lead them astray for no reason. They go astray because that's what was in their hearts. And Allah says, if there's good, and not everybody, there's plenty of good people that are not Muslim. And if I had time, I would have gone into Faisal al-Tafriqa. I would have liked to talk about that. Huh? Oh, we have to go, yeah. Well, I'm going to sign those books. Where am I going to do it? Let me just, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. اللهم أقسم لنا من خشيتك ما تحول بيننا وبين معاصيك، ومن طاعتك ما تبلغ به جنتك، ومن اليقين ما تهون به علينا مصائب الدنيا، ومتعنا بأسماعنا وأبصارنا وقوتنا أبدا ما أحييتنا، واجعل ثأرنا على من ظلمنا وانصرنا على من عادانا، ولا تجعل مصيبتنا في ديننا، ولا تجعل الدنيا أكبر همنا ولا مبلغ علمنا ولا غاية رغبتنا ولا إلى النار مصيرنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم لا تسلط علينا بذنوبنا من لا يخافك ولا يرحمنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم بارك في هذه الجماعة، اللهم انزل علينا الرحمات، اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا هذه العقيدة واجعلها ثابتة راسخة في قلوبنا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اصحب لنا إسلاما صحيحا، اللهم اجعل لنا إسلاما صحيحا يصحب الاستسلام لأوامرك ونواهيك، وإيمانا خالصا راسخا ثابتا محفوظا من جميع الشبه والمهالك، وإحسان يزج بنا في حضرات الغيوب ونتطهر به من أنواع الغفلات وسائر العيوب يا أرحم الراحمين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون، والسلام على المرسلين، والحمد لله رب العالمين، وصلي اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما. الحمد لله. جزاكم الله خيرا.
Assalamu alaikum. Please remain seated for just a few minutes, inshallah. Just got a couple of announcements to make before chaos starts. Okay. Just really like to thank everybody for attending. It's been a long day. I hope everybody benefited from the day's events. Definitely would like to thank the Sultan Bahu Trust for their hospitality and generosity. It really wasn't possible without them. So if anybody knows any of their representatives, please thank them personally as well. Shaykh Hamza is going to be signing the books for the sisters. So if the brothers can vacate out to the marquee and the outside area, Shaykh Hamza is going to come outside and sign books and generally, make himself accessible to people should they wish to meet him, inshallah.